Wow, that's a perfect description for the women of the world. Thank you, Jude, and the WOW Global team for bringing us together. I'm Pat Mitchell, and I'm issuing another call to action for dangerous women to meet the challenges of dangerous times. Times like this that call on us to be braver, bolder, to speak up, speak out, and show up for one another. When we do that, we shift the power paradigm. As leaders, we make our communities and countries safer. As mothers, grandmothers, sisters, daughters, wives, we come together, connect around our stories and experiences, and with our collective passions and purpose, we change the world. This is our time to do that. This is our destiny together.
My name is Camille John, and I'm excited to chair this evening's panel for Women of the World and want to thank the organization for this opportunity. I'm a senior vice president with Bank of America and head of our underrepresented ethnic talent strategy for its global diversity and inclusion organization. Tonight, I'm joined by four powerful panelists who will join me in discussing women's health disparities during the COVID 19 crisis. I'll first up introduce our panelists. We are joined by Tausi Suedi, co founder of Childbirth Survival International, Valerie Weir, forensic nurse examiner for Greater Baltimore Medical Center's Safe and Domestic Violence Program, Noni Robinson, founder of Black Girls Eat, and Abigail Echo-Hawk, Chief Research Officer for the Seattle Indian Health Board. Before my career in financial services, I had a life in healthcare, and I can see more and more how financial services and healthcare are are definitely linked and have a huge impact on us having a productive workforce, as well as its impact on managing our financial lives, as well as a greater economy. All of us have been impacted in some way by the health crisis, either due to the loss or illness of family members and friends. Managing working remotely, navigating life as an essential worker, the list goes on and on. All of us have had to adjust to a new normal, and we would be remiss if we did not mention the global Black Lives Matter movement that's also taken the world by storm, focused on social inequalities and racism, which has placed a spotlight on challenges that people of color face day in and day out. So I want to start up with our wonderful panelists, and Abigail, just ask you to share a bit, because we've seen early on in the news cycles around the pandemic that it's really uncovered disproportionate impacts for people of color overall. What have you seen or experienced as it relates to women of color in your work since the crisis started?
Thank you so much for that question, Camille. I think this is a really important one and that needs to be talked about, not just here in the United States, but internationally, the impact that women of color continue to feel as, for many of us, as the primary folks caring for our children, taking care of our homes, often financially responsible. And for the people that I serve as American Indian and Alaska Native people across the United States, I work as the Chief Research Officer at Seattle Indian Health Board, which is a health clinic with culturally attuned care for American Indians and Alaska Natives. In addition, I work nationally across the country with urban dwelling American Indians and Alaska Natives, which is approximately 70% of our population in the US. And our people are suffering right now. Our people are dying right now. It illustrates a point. Seattle was the epicenter in the United States to begin the COVID-19 crisis that is happening right now. And my team and I, in early February, asked the federal government, our state agencies, our county agencies, for more personal protection equipment because we were seeing an influx of folks coming into our clinic. And instead, what we got, instead of the PPE, the personal protection equipment we requested, we received a box of body bags. Before we received masks, before we received gowns, before we received gloves. We got a box of body bags. And that is indicative to how the United States government has been dealing with American Indians and Alaska Natives in this country since the beginning of colonialism. Our underfunded healthcare systems are directly impacting our families being able to take care of themselves. We are at higher risk and have more vulnerabilities in disease, for example, diabetes, asthma, cardiovascular disease, all of the underlying risk factors for COVID-19. And in fact, in our rural areas, right now we're telling everybody, wash your hands. That's what you need to do. Wash your hands. Make sure you're doing that for 20 seconds, running water, hot water. We have a crisis of families in reservations and villages across the United States who don't have running water and have never had running water. And here we are telling them the way to prevent COVID is to wash your hands. But the federal government never got the water to them. It's never been there. And our tribes are fighting for their water rights. We look in the urban areas where I work right now and across the United States, because of the oppression, suppression, and continuing racism against our people, we currently have some of the highest rates of poverty in urban settings, including high rates of homelessness. In Seattle, Native people are 10 times more likely to be homeless than non-Hispanic white folks. But the resiliency of our community continues regardless of this ongoing repression that we see and the United States government not fulfilling our treaty rights. I think of a homeless family that when they said we need to wash our hands, they were boiling water on the side of the road in Seattle over a campfire by their tent so them and their children could wash their hands. That's what they were boiling water in, that homeless family. We have our relatives across the United States. Our Native people, particularly our Femme folks, have stepped up and are ensuring that our cultural ways are what are leading, and that means we protect our elders. So our community cultural values being led by the women in this country have really incorporated the systems we are seeing in tribes across the country, including tribal entities are not allowing non-tribal people to come onto their tribal land. They are exercising their sovereign rights to do that and to protect their people, and they have to, because we don't have the healthcare systems that would ensure their people are healthy and whole if COVID-19 sweeps their reservations. And one more point, we know one of the biggest hotspots of COVID-19 is on the Navajo Nation, which is in 3 states in the United States. And those people are suffering. Many of them don't have running water. Many of them have households that have a lot of people in one place because of the poverty that exists there. The tribe is doing everything they can, and we are seeing our women step up, sew masks, ensure people are social distancing. But we shouldn't have to be fighting this hard. I'm tired of the body bags. I want the resources.
Wow, that is really sobering. I know we've been hearing over and over, and there's been a lot of assumptions going into the pandemic. To your point about hand washing and just assuming that everyone has the ability to wash their hands, and just hearing some of the harrowing conditions that the communities of color are facing, our Native American populations are facing, to be able to manage the crisis. I mean, that's super sobering, but I'm also glad to hear about the resilience as you're continuing to fight on. So we'll come back in a moment, time permitting, to talk about some of the additional access to resources. Noni, you've been focused on nutrition and wellness for women of color, particularly Black women. What's led you to do this work, and why is your work so critical in this moment?
The work is extremely critical at this moment. Pre-COVID, the trauma of systemic racism has been killing Black women and girls for hundreds of years. We are the leading causes of obesity and nutrition-related diseases. So this was pre-COVID. Now that we're in COVID mode, COVID has been called the great equalizer. As we see daily, as we've seen in the past, no one is immune to it. Anyone could succumb to it. And the data is showing the rates are increasing throughout the United States daily, and that African American women are at a much higher rate to die of COVID than American white women. And this is due to several things. What I spoke of first was that we are susceptible to have lower immune systems due to being overweight, obese, or having those immune deficiency disorders, having diabetes, having high cholesterol and hypertension. So with that becomes stress, a suppressed immune system. So Black Girls Eat, I found that to have a or be a social media platform for Black women and girls to have a safe space to talk about our relationships with food and particularly to highlight nutrition education. That's what's going to save us from COVID. That's what's going to save us from being obese. That's what's going to save us from nutrition related diseases. The education and implementing it, and for it to be ongoing. African American women are experiencing racism when we go for medical care. We're not trusting of doctors, how we're treated when we show up, how we're treated based on how we look, how we're dressed, what insurance we have. And if we're in rural areas, it's hard to get there. African American women are at a high rate of being essential workers. We are sanitation workers. We are healthcare workers. We are cashiers. We are bus drivers. We are out there on the front lines. And while we're out there on the front lines, we're not healthy. We're already not healthy. And then when we go to the doctors, some of them tell us, go home, you're fine, right? Some of them won't see us. Sometimes it's hard to get an appointment. Sometimes we don't have the copay. So Black Girls Eat is shedding light on the importance of nutrition and wellness and being honest about how it's important for us to guard ourselves every day nutritionally. That's how our immune systems will get strengthened. That's how we can protect ourselves against COVID. That's how we can fight for our rights when we are healthy, when we have advocacy, when we have an advocate. When we are well, we won't have to go to the doctors as much. When we are not feeling the effects of racism, we will feel comfortable going to the doctor. We will feel comfortable reaching out for help. We will feel like we're in a safe space and that the United States of America gives a damn about our health and wellness.
Hmm. Right on. I mean, you unpack so much in terms of access. I know we saw a lot around pre-existing conditions and the need to really build our immune systems, especially now more than ever, so that we can have greater outcomes, better outcomes for women of color, and especially just being on the front lines, right? So on top of all of that, we are really right in the very midst of getting
We
access,
are
having the ability to get exposed to the virus.
definitely. It's something that I'm passionate about. Black women, we are highly educated. We are mayors. We're first ladies. We're educators. We're athletes. We're coaches. We're teachers. We're doctors. We're PhDs. But we're still struggling with our health. And we're struggling
Hmm.
with how to deal with that every day. We don't make that a habit. We're not being mindful regarding it. And it is killing us. And COVID has opened up um, all of the racial issues regarding health and wellness. And so it's important, and I feel strongly in Black Girls Eat. I want to equip young girls and Black women on how to be better in terms of our health and wellness.
Absolutely. So we'll talk a little bit about the tips right at the end, but I want to
Sure.
shift over to Tosi, and part of this we've seen with the crisis has been just how are we managing families? How are we going about the acts of caregiving? And this has been a challenge as well, especially for expecting families and finding ways to have healthy pregnancies as well as manage safe childbirth. As our expert around maternal health, how are women of color and women more broadly managing their pregnancies during this time?
Thanks, Camille. Glad to be here and to join all my panelists. You ask a very important question and also a great question and also a timely question because prior COVID, women of color, Hispanic women, Black, brown women were 3 to 4 more times likely to have a negative pregnancy or childbirth experience. What COVID has done has really made it clear how broken the healthcare system is in the United States when it comes to Black maternal health care. So now with this COVID that's happening, we have so many issues that are really impacting women of color to be able to access prenatal care, considering that already they were facing challenges such as transportation. Oftentimes we see women of color entering prenatal care at a late stage, like towards their third trimester or even in their third trimester, where it's a little bit challenging to catch or quickly identify some of those risk factors that could lead to an infant loss or even the birth of a baby before its due date. So again, this pandemic has really created opportunities not only for women, but even the system, the healthcare system overall, to realize what are some of those weak spots. And it's several of them from A to Z, several spots when it comes to health insurance, when it comes to accessibility, when it comes to transportation, when it comes to even understanding health insurance benefits. So there are all those challenges that, women of color are facing. And in terms of how they're managing right now, services or prenatal care is being offered via telephone. So it's telework. I'm sorry, not telework. It's, through those telephonic services, or sometimes it could be virtually. But now we have to think of those families or those pregnant women who don't have access to that platform. How are they able to manage and have their virtual appointments, or how are they able to manage and have those telephonic appointments? What about those women that have certain risk factors, or those women that need to actually see a physician in person? So, it's sad at the same time, because when we think of the United States, one of the most developed countries, but again, ranking the lowest in all the developed countries in terms of quality of maternal health care, and especially when we're talking about women of color, to the extent of some states or even some parts of the country ranking in the same category with some developing countries that I'm familiar with in terms of the maternal health statistics over there. So they're struggling. They're trying. It's not easy. We've seen increased deaths due to this COVID, again, because women are not able to either access their obstetrician for their services. Women are not able to deliver or have that support of their doulas. Women are not able to go to the healthcare facility to deliver on time. So we're seeing all those challenges happening to women of color. And again, it's about how do we fix this system? We should not wait for post-COVID to be able to address some of these social inequities or even racial disparities, but we should be doing it right now, because there's a lot of hurt happening in families and a lot of loss that could have been prevented.
Absolutely. I love that. So access continues to be a theme. Valerie, we want to turn to you and make sure that we do not forget about the overall health and welfare of individuals who are victims of domestic violence. And you play a critical role for women and children who are at different places on the domestic violence spectrum. How's the pandemic impacted this population, and how have you navigated this in your work?
So anecdotally, during any sort of a natural disaster, incidences of domestic violence have always been shown to increase. And during COVID, we weren't expecting anything different. One unique situation with COVID is with everyone having to be at home or locked down with their family in their house, they are locked in with their abuser. So there's more of that one-on-one time with the abuser and the inability to get out. So normally when someone's in a domestic violence situation, if they would want to reach out for support, their normal support system isn't available. They're in lockdown with their abuser. Their abusers can use the pandemic as a way to fuel that abuse, to either keep them inside and to isolate them even more from their social circle. With financial strains of being out of work, if one partner is the sole provider for the household and that person is out of work, increasing that financial strain, having the children at home, and like I said, having more of that one-on-one time just makes that abuse increase during the time of COVID. We anticipated a little bit more of an increase once some of the restrictions started to lift, and that has shown to be true. We've always received phone calls throughout COVID into our program we're available 24/7 for support. But since some of the restrictions have started to be lifted and the kids were going back to do some virtual school, or one of the partners were going back to work, and there's now a safe time for someone to make a phone call or to look online for resources, we've seen a huge increase in the number of domestic violence related calls that we've been getting.
Thanks so much, Valerie. I really want to thank each of you for joining and just giving just quick nuggets of what you're seeing around women's health during the crisis, and really sharing your perspectives as we really buckle down and continue to fight this and help to manage and impacts however we can. So I want to wish you guys to a continued safe and healthy journey as we continue to fight for women throughout the crisis. Thanks to each of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey y'all, my name is Vanessa Geffrard, and I'm the founder and creator of Vagesteem, a workshop series and podcast committed to having courageous conversations about love, sex, and everything in between. And speaking of sex, today we are talking about sex during the Rona. So the reason why we're talking about sex during this global pandemic is because just because we're having a global pandemic does not mean we don't have those feelings, does not mean that we're not feeling a little lonely. It does not mean that all things stop, right? But I want to make sure that we have the tools to ensure that we're doing this safely. So if you follow me on Instagram, something that I told my followers at the beginning of this was the dick appointments are canceled. And when I said that, folks were so mad at me. All of our sex appointments are canceled as far as I was concerned, because we were talking about our strict quarantine guidelines. And so I know that's not realistic. Forgive me. But I want to make sure that we use this time today to talk about how we can stay safe during the Rona, during COVID-19, and during this global pandemic. So first things first to know is that coronavirus has been found in saliva, feces, and semen. So the first guideline that I'm giving y'all, this is the time to explore us. This is a time to explore some self-pleasure. Listen, no one can please you like you. No one can do it like you. So this is the time to break out some of those toys. That's the time to break out and get more in tune with ourselves so that we can fulfill those urges while we're still trying to navigate being in quarantine. If you're like, Vanessa, girl, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not about that life. I'm not doing that. Or I do that with a partner. I need my partner. Fine. Here's what you need to know. So because coronavirus has been found in saliva and feces and semen, it's super important now than ever that we ensure that we're taking all of the precautions. So that means, unfortunately, I know kissing's intimate for us, but this means that we might have to stay away, that we will be staying away from kissing for a while. Also, when it's found in feces, that means we need to cut back on any of the anal play that we might be engaging in. So that means we want to protect ourselves using some dental dams. And we also want to make sure that we're taking extra precaution in washing our hands and washing any toys, any of the things around us that we are using while engaging in sex. Next up, because recently we just found out that coronavirus has been found in a study done that has been found in semen, this is how we want to break out, our male or external condoms or our female or internal condoms during this time. We want to take all of the precautions that we can to reduce bodily fluids being exchanged, especially since every single day we are finding out something new about coronavirus. And so at the beginning of this, we didn't really think that it was found in semen, but now studies are showing that it may be potentially found in semen and can potentially be spread sexually as well. So we do want to keep that in mind, and we do want to take all of the precautions that we can take. Lastly, we want to ask questions, right? So if we are going to engage in sex with people who do not live with us, it's super important to ask, hey, who have you been around? hey, are you paying attention to the social distancing guidelines, or have you been hanging out with your friends, right? So we want to make sure whoever we're letting into our homes, that they are staying safe as well, that they're adhering to our social distancing guidelines. So here's the things we need to know. This is the time to engage in that personal action. If we don't, it's really important that we use our condoms, our dental dams, and we're making sure that we're asking the questions, right? We want to make sure that we're still washing our hands. We want to make sure that the folks we're engaging with are adhering to those social distancing guidelines, and we want to be as safe as possible. I appreciate y'all being here. I appreciate us having this conversation, and I really hope that we stay safe and healthy during the time of the quarantines.
Black girls be beautiful but be hidden behind primers plastered on face to prepare you for the abusive punches thrown your way every day. Concealers conceal your fears. Waterproof eyeliners unaffected by your tears. Too afraid to let the world know who you really is, girl. Where is your spunk? Junk in the trunk don't make you special, girl. You get it from the ancestors. And loose girls can't stand straight cause they foundation is liquid. But foundation should never be the foundation you build your life upon, cause when it deteriorates, so will that relationship. If beauty is your gimmick, then soon you'll be irrelevant. So I'm saying, black girl royal, where is your robe and your crown, your gele and your gown? So you've been wearing the wrong costume. And people have been mistaking you for a hoodlum, a hood rat, a pigeon, a alley cat, a good time girl, a floozy called friend with benefits. Respect is not an option. So get it on sight like eye contact, like don't contact me unless you got it, see? Cause I got it on deck like self-respect, woman, you are queen. And baby girl is just a princess, a queen in training, so don't answer to any other name, even when it's your friends calling. There is a throne in the seat of your pants. And you are not queen because he is king. That scepter will never be an accurate measuring stick. The two are mutually exclusive, though it seems the higher up you go, the less double X chromosomes. So much so that even the God we worship has a Y. Still, the genealogical arc of history is etched on your thighs. The golden sands of heaven line the canal of your womb. So, brother, watch how you speak to her. Humble yourself and worship her, because woman is the closest thing to God. The creator crafted Adam from breath and soil, but you were molded in a fertile belly. Your Eden was transmitted umbilically. So, brother, I say worship her fervently, because a sister holds the sustenance to feed humanity in her breasts, comfort in her biceps, with a back built to bear burdens and shoulders suited to uplift, cloaked in allure. And I'm sure you've seen her hips, but these bodies have become bullseyes branded with lust, and everything we do is always too much. You see, a man can never be too masculine, because the more he is, the more valid he seems. But when you increase femininity, you decrease legitimacy, efficacy, and diminish our ability to lead. We are the ones who truly wear the masks. Pretending is our specialty, because to be black and woman in a white man's world is so troubling. We minimize our minds, trying not to emasculate the ego of the man who's been made fragile, tricked into believing that our greatness puts his masculinity at risk, as if two stars can't coexist. We must not compromise our very essence for this status quo. We gotta let the world know that us black girls must be considered equal.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We are so excited that you're here with us. We're going to be talking tonight about women in prison reform in the Say Her Name era. There's lots to talk about here. I have two amazing women who join me. I'm so excited, I can barely contain it. But I have two wonderful women here. We're going to have a great conversation about some of the things that we're seeing and some of the things that we're facing and why prison reform is necessary. I think there are those of us who are along the curve that are talking about abolition, and then there are those who are still coming up the curve. So our our objective tonight is to bring you up the curve and to talk about all things prison reform in the Say Her Name era. I'd first like to introduce my guests. I'm going to start with Laura Flanders of the Laura Flanders Show. Laura, over to you. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here with you. And how exciting are these 24 hours? So I host a TV show called The Laura Flanders Show, which we say is the place where the people who say it can't be done take a back seat to the people who are doing it. We're on TV, radio, cable. You can find us online at lauraflanders.org. It's about lifting up viable, actionable models of change.
Awesome. Thank you. And then we have the incomparable Tyra Patterson. Tyra, we're so glad that you're here with us. Your story is amazing. We cannot wait to get into it and dig into it and talk about what you're doing right now, all the great work you're doing. Over to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Tyra Patterson. I work as the Community Outreach Director at the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, and I'm also the Ambassador for Represent Justice. So some of the things I love to do, I work in the space of social justice, trying to end mass incarceration, especially for women, but specifically discussing the incarceration of women. People who have the lived experience, I feel, should be in the rooms. And Audre Lorde could not say it better. She spoke, and it's one of my favorite quotes. It says, "I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very, very different from my own." So I live by that.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. There are a couple of things I want to start with in terms of stats, because I think, stats can go one way or another, but there are a couple that I want to raise because I think they're really important, and they paint a picture of the dire situation that we're in, particularly around incarceration for women. So there has been a 500% increase over the last 40 years in incarceration, 500%. In Arkansas, for example, 1 in 5 children have lost a parent to incarceration. Between 1980 and 2017, the percentage of incarcerated women only, increased by 750%. And so when you think about what that means around community, when you think about what that means about children losing parents, when you think about what that means in terms of the increase, we have a problem. And when you look at the numbers, white women have a 1 in 111 person chance of being incarcerated. Black women, 1 in 18. Latina women, 1 in 45. And Indigenous women are not recorded. So in terms of the data points that we could find. And so those numbers are really, really, really sobering, right? And I'd like to kind of dig into that a little bit, and Tyra, kind of start with you and your story. Because I think, the other thing that I wanted to raise around this is that the rate for Black women was twice the rate of imprisonment for white women up until 2019. So can you kind of talk a little bit about your story and talk about what you saw while you were imprisoned in terms of those numbers? Because I'm sure you could see the shift given the length of time that you had to spend there.
Yes, I was. I was wrongfully incarcerated for 23 years, so I spent more than half of my life in prison. So to witness what I witnessed is devastating. And I do have a stat about that. Approximately, I think 70% of women in prisons are mothers, and we can't forget to say that. So we have to consider the domino effect it has on our children. Black girls often deal with adult filiation, hold on, I'm trying to think. If I don't get it, it's okay. But Black girls often deal with it. They are perceived as being older and more responsible. And that's something that we've always had to hold on to whenever we were younger. But when people are incarcerated, like we have a few clients who are juveniles, and they have the responsibility of older adults in prison. So our numbers are spiking when it comes to women's prison, and it's sad.
It is. And so, and Laura, you and I have had some conversations about this, and you've been following prison reform, or even just kind of the issues surrounding mass incarceration for many, many years. Can you talk to a little bit about how it's evolved? because it has evolved over time, and you will have seen the
Yeah.
shift, and you, as a journalist, you've covered it. So can you talk about that a
Yeah,
little bit?
I look back to the late 1980s and the early 1990s, and a lot of us are on the outside of the media, really on the margins of the media, saying we need to be covering, our mainstream media needs to be covering the impact on women of things like mandatory sentencing laws that were told to the nation as a story about stopping drug kingpins. But anybody who looked at the story through the lens of gender and race could see this was going to lead to the spike that you just described of 750, some people say it's 800% increase in incarceration of women since the 1980s. So we've seen this tremendous spike. We've got 220,000 women and women identified people behind bars. And when we're talking about incarceration of women and girls, we need to make sure that we remember that a good portion of those people, you said a 1 in 18 chance for a Black woman, a 1 in 111 chances for a white woman to spend some time in the care, as they put it, of the criminal justice system. That includes prisons, but also jails. It includes ICE detention. It includes youth detention facilities. And the statistics that I'm seeing show that more than 60% of women are in jail, which is to say they are pre-trial. They haven't even been tried, let alone convicted. And they're in situations that are a direct threat to their health and the health of their family. Because just as Tyra said, 70 to 80% of the women in prison are mothers, mostly the primary caregiver. They are more likely to have TB, diabetes, depression, AIDS, HIV. I mean, they're in very dangerous circumstances for their health. And we were hearing about COVID earlier, not to mention violence. I mean, I have never spoken to a woman who was incarcerated who didn't say that she was a victim of violence. The official statistics say it's 60%. I bet it's 99.9%. And you look at the numbers on girls, and then I'll be quiet. But if you look at why girls, especially girls of color, are sent away, it's for things like truancy and disobedience. Girls, I think it's 10% of girls incarcerated are for truancy or incorrigibility, a legal term, 3% of boys. So when you look at a woman in prison, you say, is this the best, the most wealthy country in the world can do to respond to a woman who, likely or not, is fleeing violence, has poverty, can't get herself out of jail on bail that is usually set at about a year's worth of her salary, disproportionately identified as LGBT? Clearly, this is not the best we could be doing. And I think in my lifetime of covering this story, what's exciting about this moment is the subject is changing. We're getting it, that when we look at women in incarceration, we see everything that is wrong with our carceral system. We like to incarcerate rather than care. It is our easiest solution to every social problem. Put somebody in prison, but it's not easy on those families. It's not easy on those women. The violence they suffer inside makes a mockery of this having anything to do with safety, and it's costly. So I'm glad that we're now talking about abolition, as in, what would we do if putting someone away was not our first most obvious solution to a problem?
No question. I mean, that's, you summed it up perfectly. And I think, we think about the fact that policing comes before prison, right? So this is a vicious cycle that starts with policing, right? And so you have the issues that we're now experiencing. People are talking about defund the police, the abolition of prisons. I mean, that if we can move this along the curve, we're in a really good place. And it is true. We're starting to have really valid conversations that we didn't have before, and that people were not even prepared to have. And so the shift has occurred. It does feel different this time. It surely feels different this time. But then on the other side of that, you have policing to prison, but then you have what happens when people come out, right? And the support they need when they come out. And Tyra, I want to talk to you about that, because you and I have talked about this. What happens when people come out the other side? And it's not just what happens while they're there to their families and them and their families. What happens when they come out? And what do we do about that?
I think a lot of people have resource centers, but whenever I came home and so many of my friends come home, they appoint to where the resources are available and say, well, you go over to this building and you can get whatever, but they're not thinking about the healthcare. They're not thinking about, we don't have a social security card. We don't have an ID. It took me 4 months to get an ID. I couldn't even open a bank account. Thank God I had a job. But so many people come home and we need people to hold our hands just to show us the way, because so many things have changed. And so many people lenses have changed when it comes to people who have a record. With our law firm, we represent those who aren't guilty because we need to bring humanity to people who have made mistakes. And I always say, we're going to be your neighbor someday, and we need the right resources so that we can be productive just like you are. So the resources is out there, but we don't know how to navigate and get to them. It took us a long time. I am not the only Tyra Patterson. There are so many people who need the help. Reentry mentors is one thing that is a need. It is a must. I went inside prison when I had a beeper. I came home to a phone. This phone gets on my nerve. It will reboot itself. It will do things that I'm like, oh, I'm not used to this, because when we're inside prison, we didn't have the ability to be on computers because it was a security threat. And I think reentry mentors showing us where the resources are, healthcare, benefits. We need all of that, especially women with children. We need to learn how to navigate that.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really challenging space, and I'm glad, like Laura, like you said, that we're starting to think about it. But one interesting thing that's been coming up is kind of taking a decarceral approach as one of the means of prison reform. And Laura, I learned this from you, by the way. There's a woman in New York who's running for the Queen's DA, Tiffany Caban, who right. almost won. And she ran on a platform of being decarceral. What was that? I mean, I know you followed it quite closely.
The idea that somebody could almost win, and she did almost.
Are we losing?
I think
I think that for a moment, Laura is frozen.
There are people that say it was here. I'm still here.
Okay, so no. Laura, we lost you for a moment. Okay, hold on. I'll come back to you in just 1 second, Laura. Tyra, while we're waiting for the connection, it'll come. This is what happens. We're on digital platforms. We can be fluid. We know how to do this. So Tyra, why don't I come to you? I mean, because you're working with OJPC, the Ohio Justice Policy Center. What is your approach around how you support people who are coming back, or how you, because one of the things you said to me was that the work that OJPC does is different than the Innocence Project, for example.
Yes.
How so? Yes. And what does that look like, and why?
Well, what it looks like is we all love the word innocence. We all love a good green apple that hasn't been bitten out of. So we all support that. But when you hear the word guilt, people shy away from that, and they're automatically put you in a judgment box. And people don't humanize people who have made mistakes. They're like castorized. They don't want to give them a job. Yes, there's jobs out there, and I respect all jobs, but most of the jobs that are offered to us are menial jobs. And people in prison, I can speak for the women. They are talented. They are creative. They get job skills while they are there. I didn't know how to read or write when I went to prison. I was 11 years old when I dropped out, so I had to put myself through the first grade, second grade. Eventually, I became a licensed engineer. But if I wasn't who I am today, I would never be able to get a job coming home and saying, hey, I'm a licensed engineer. Can I get this job? It's just not offered. And another thing, people don't realize what Laura was talking about. Women need treatment, not jail. Especially if their crisis is of drug addiction or anything like that. People with the lived experience must be in leadership. I believe that, and not as a tokenism. A lot of people use us as a token.
Absolutely. So, and that's interesting that you should bring up the drug point, and then I'm coming back to you in 2 seconds, Laura, because I'm going to wrap that thought up. It was, the 1980s. Is when the increase started, and that was when there was this quote unquote war on drugs. And if you look at sentencing for women, which Laura, you mentioned, is disproportionate, in terms of the crime. And so coming back to addressing that and talking about being decarceral, we were getting ready to talk about Tiffany Caban in Queens, who was running for the Queens DA, and that she almost won. That's where we were.
Yeah, I mean, the conversation has changed to one of decarceration, and I think that's the right one. And the fact that Tiffany, who was an out lesbian, said the really big thing that I'm out about is that I'm running on a decarceral platform, and she did nearly win. And I think we're going to see more of that. Look, the US has something like 4% of the world's female population and 1/3 of the incarcerated women. We don't have different women than the rest of the world. We have different prosecution practices, and we have different responses to problems that people have. I mean, again, the numbers of who is inside, 1/3 of women incarcerated identify as LGBT, 40% of women of color. There is a reason these people are inside, and it's not to do with them, it's to do with the challenges they've faced on the outside. So we've increasingly started talking on our program about models of mutual aid and alternative justice, reconstructive justice, transformative justice. Can we look to instead of incarceration? And there are cities around the country, Durham, even New York, that are now providing alternatives for incarceration for many kind of classes of people, as they put it. There's also the idea that we could have another number we could call instead of 911 when we had somebody in crisis, and we didn't necessarily want them incarcerated. We needed a mediator. Durham instituted that and used some of their police funds, and they're finding this is an incredibly popular option for people. If they had somewhere else to go, they wouldn't call the cops. And the cops that arrive are not trained to deal with the kind of challenges that they find on the doorstep. And this is the conversation that we're beginning to have now as we talk about abolition and defund. A woman on my show said last week, she said, I'm not for defunding safety. I'm for defunding the police who haven't been keeping everybody in this community safe. So, I mean, I think the conversation is very exciting right now, but the numbers, again, going back to the question of in jail, 60% not on it for any reason other than they can't pay the bail. This is an insane situation, costly for everybody. When you're in jail, you have less likelihood of being able to keep your family together, to keep connection with any of your world outside. Calls are 3 times as expensive. You can't even get letters, just postcards. I mean, Tyra has told the story so beautifully, but we can do better than this, I think, is the message that women, especially women of color, have been bringing to our attention for decades. The only thing that's changed, I think, is we've started listening.
And it took a couple of pandemics we have the multitude of pandemics that are happening, and it took those all to happen for this to kind of kick off. And so, they say there's silver linings and everything. We're going to hope this is one of them, because it's hard to find them at the moment, given everything that's going on. But one of the things that you mentioned, Laura, which I think we should pick up on and have a conversation about is, perhaps there should be a different number or a different way when things happen. The issue is with that, and I think that's absolutely right. But this is the thing, that I'd like to question and challenge. For Black people, the police does not mean safety. For white people, the police mean safety, right? And so, how do you then retrain people when what they've always considered safe is 911, right? And a part of the issue, is going to be around retraining people to call somebody else, but that also requires that they think about what they're seeing and experiencing. And that is going to be that's putting a lot of the onus on people who have none of that experience and who have been kind of indoctrinated over their entire lives to behave in a certain way.
I think so, that
go ahead.
The words white supremacy, I think, need to be said here. This is what we white people need to be untrained. I mean, look at that woman in Central Park who not only was in the habit of police when she was in danger, but knew she could deploy police force against a Black man just because he was annoying her.
Yeah.
This is what we need to be doing, white people, de-learning white supremacy and white privilege. And the fact that these words are even just getting used today is at least a step in the right direction. But I'm very scared that this window that opened up with the killing of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd is already closing. And that if we don't work really hard to keep our elbows in the frame, in the door from closing, we're going to be having this conversation for a very, very long time still to come.
Well, this is certainly, I mean, this is a marathon, right? It is not a sprint. It's going to take sustained energy. And there's so much to do and unpick to even begin to think about this. And, one of the things, that I'd like to talk to you about, Tyra, is, when you think about what Black communities used to be, whereby, people, we kind of had our own system of punishment. Like, when people did things, the community jumped in. It's kind of like I know your mama and I'm gonna spank your backside because you did X, right? As more and more people have been incarcerated and more people are taken away from their communities, that isn't the same anymore. We don't have those same kinds of relationships in our communities whereby, you can call somebody's mother, or, we don't have our own system of ensuring that when somebody does something wrong, we manage it, right? Anymore. It used to be that way. Let's talk a little bit about isolation and what that's like and what that does to somebody who's incarcerated, particularly when they have to think about reentry.
Good question. And wow. First, I would love to comment on what Laura said about using a different number for 911. That's brilliant. If we can get that done, I think a lot of people will feel safe. But a lot of people come in like the isolation part. The trust levels, not knowing where to go or who to trust, or if people can even trust you after being incarcerated. I think it's God, how can I explain it? The isolation is real. A lot of people, when we're inside the institution, we share a 10 by 12 cell. So, and a lot of women go to isolation to basically survive and not be around people. So we come home and we're isolating ourselves, and it's so, I don't know, like, it's institutional, like we're institutionalized. And I would have to say that, and I don't mean to be, I don't mean to put any of us down who have been incarcerated, but a lot of us have those lenses that we're institutionalized. And if we go to certain places, will we be accepted? Will we be rejected? So I think our self-esteems are shot. And I really don't know. It's hard.
You've explained it well enough. You've explained. I mean, that's the explanation, right? And I think that I don't know how you have a choice but to feel that way. If you've been incarcerated for 20 years, then absolutely you're going to be institutionalized, right? And so you've had for 20 years somebody telling you what to do, and then you come home and there's nobody telling you what to do, and you're isolated, right? And so I'm moving to kind of mental health and how that impacts people. Right. And kind of people returning to prison, because that's what they know. Right. There are a raft of things that we can get into, but I'd like to we have about 6.5 minutes left. And I really want to talk about, Tyra. I know this has gone so quickly. What you're doing now. There are a couple of really interesting projects you're working on. There's the murals I'd love to hear about. Let's talk about that. Tell us about the murals.
Okay, when I moved to Cincinnati, I'm really trying to talk fast because I want us to get it in. So when I came home, I noticed, because of course the isolation thing, I noticed when I was driving around that there was no social justice murals. And I was like, I wonder why. And one of my close friends said, because we're a conservative city. And she said it with conviction. And I was like, well, tell me more about that. And I wonder why we don't have that, but we have everything else. She said, I don't know. And I was like, well, I'm about to pitch an idea to Artworks. So I partnered with Artworks through Ohio Justice and Policy Center. And I chose 5 women, those who are guilty, those who are innocent, those who have been working in the social justice field. And I wanted them to be recognized as human beings, humanity, right? So they love the idea. And the mural, the social justice mural, is being painted this summer. And I wanted to change change the conversation. I said, people are starting to hire people coming home, and that's all great. Remember the jobs that I talked about? I said, but why can't we hire somebody who is still incarcerated to paint the mural, because they have the talents, right? So they was like, well, why not? It's your mural, do it. So I hired a woman who was formerly incarcerated, who spent 25 years in prison, who was amazing, and gave her equal pay. So now that she will have a job coming home, she will have job monies to start off, to buy her clothes, to buy her brassieres and stuff like that, because we wasn't able to purchase real bras. All we had was like sports bras and stuff, and people don't realize the need and the expenses that we need to have those items. So I'm excited about it. And me and David Singleton, which is my hero, and my boss and my attorney, were writing a book together, because so many people view his book, would read his book, wouldn't read mine, because he's a Harvard grad. I'm an elementary dropout. I was in prison. He was my attorney. So we really wanted to make it universal. And how are we co-workers today? So that's exciting, and I'm looking forward to it.
That is wonderful. I mean, that's wonderful. And I think, there is, we can go again deep into the rabbit hole about equal pay, because equal pay, even more so for somebody who's coming home, a returning citizen from, from being incarcerated, is going to experience that. But I love that you are ensuring that people who come out have a different experience. And, that's what this is about. It's about making sure they don't get there to start. But then B, if people are there and the folks are going to have to come home, how they have a different experience when they come back. And I always say, I love, Laura, you're saying people who say it can't be done take a backseat to the people who are doing it. And Tyra, that is you. You are doing it. There are. Yeah, I mean, it's really heartening to hear. And I think, kind of in close, we have 3 minutes left. What I'd like for each of you to do, take a minute, you each get a minute. I'd like you to just tell me what the world would look like for you without prisons. Reimagine the world. I know that's a big ask, but I think that you both have probably done that already, given your experiences. And you gave a little bit of something, Laura, when you talked about, having another number or whatever it is, but I'd like to even think bigger than that. Who are we without prisons?
There's an extraordinary restorative, transformative justice movement out there that we cover on our show. And I think I'm not even capable of imagining beyond learning from them. That we can, if we turn to the people who, as you pointed out, many people amongst us who are not in the habit of calling the police and have figured out other ways to actually reach just settlements in their communities when there's a conflict. All sorts of people. They are modeling right now what to do in a world without prisons. And it's hard, rough work talking to your abuser, gathering together a pot of people who can communicate on your behalf, plotting who is safe for you, who isn't safe for you, how do you create more safety in your lives. We've all been learning a lot about finding new networks and who we can rely on in this period of pandemic. And I think we're going to be a world without prisons, with more information every day if we pay attention to these existing pockets of alternative. They're out there.
Thank you. Tyra.
Great. Hey, I'm going to be blunt. People can do more without punishment, be more whole within themselves. Incarceration doesn't work. Give people what they need and they won't offend. It's about equality and equity. Let's start something new with treatment centers and place people in positions where they need that. When they need the help, let's meet their needs. Because prison it hurts more than anything.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what we're going to close, I'm going to close on.
I'm not saying that we don't need prison. I'm sorry.
No. What did you? I missed that. I'm sorry.
I said I'm not saying that we don't need prisons, but however, we have too many.
Yeah, we have way too many. It's a business, and that means we have too many. Whenever there's money attached, the per person per person revenue attached, it's going to be a problem. That's one of the things that we have to consider. But I want to say thank you to you both. It's been a pleasure having this conversation and starting to just kind of start to unpick it. It's a big topic. And I'm grateful to you both for that. And I will just end on the fact that, this panel was called Prison Reform in the Say Her Name era. And I just want people to remember as we sign off that there are thousands of Breonna Taylors, there are thousands of Tyra Pattersons, and it's our collective responsibility to say their names. Thank you. Have a good one.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ellen Cherry, and I'm a Baltimore, Maryland, USA-based song and story alchemist, and it is an honor and a privilege to be performing today for you as part of WOW Global 24. I'm going to play a song for you that I wrote called Walking on a Straight Line, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it afterwards. But first, the song. Here we go. I am sorry that I said that I am sorry so many times. You must forgive me as I wander on a path that is a circle in my mind. If I tell you that I'm walking on a straight line as I always planned, it never matters where I go because I always end up just where I began. Walking on a straight line, the saddest soul you'll ever meet. Walking on a straight line, guess I'll just repeat. I have used up all my ink in writing novels of my wrongs and my regrets. Well, this is helpful to remind me and to never allow me to forget. If I let go, what would I do with all those hidden heavy bags of shame? They are my first place trophies to show you that I can be the winner of this game. Walking on a straight line, sparked a flame so blue it burns. Walking on a straight line, it's okay, I never learn. Walking on a straight line, I could leave the past behind. Walking on a straight line, roll the tape and I rewind. I could tell you that I'm walking on a straight line as quickly as I can. It never matters where I go because I always end up just where I began. Thank you so much for letting me perform for you today. I'm honored and privileged to be a part of this 24-hour online celebration of women and girls throughout the world. I bring you so much love and greetings from America to you wherever you are. Again, my name is Ellen Cherry, and I chose that song for the subject of it relating to both COVID-19 and to the Black Lives Matter movement. It has been amazing to feel the pain and the joy of the changes that both of these events in our lives have brought. It's an incredible time, and we're feeling all of that. The pain of change and the joy of change. And sometimes with change of any type, whether it's a slow change or a quick change like a trauma, it can reverberate in weird and strange and interesting ways that have to do with mental health challenges. I was hit by a drunk driver in 2013 and it turned my world literally upside down. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, which led to a lot of anxiety, which is something that I think many people feel in times like these when we're dealing with both a pandemic and the very, very necessary push for racial and social justice. So I encourage you to take care of your mental health. I think that's a really important part of being a revolutionary and a radical thinker, is to take care of yourself. And the way that I do it is through songwriting. So I wrote that song when I was feeling especially anxious and had these circular thoughts. And so you can hear that in the song, the repetitiveness of it. And it helped me to bring that thought pattern out through music. So I hope that it helped you too. If you want to find me, you can find me at www.ellencherry.com. That's the girl's name, Ellen, and the fruit cherry.com. And you can connect to me on Facebook and Instagram. I would love to meet you and be able to play and share music and stories with you at any time. Take care, have fun, and enjoy this 24-hour celebration.
And welcome to Women and Race during the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm Heather Harris, Professor of Communication at Stevenson University, and I'm tonight's moderator. In alphabetical order, our panelists are Karen Fleshman, founder of Racy Conversations, Anti-Racist Workshops, and the self-described role model for white women. Regina Jackson, co-founder of Race to Dinner, a starting point where she, as an African-American woman, sits with white women to have difficult conversations about racism and the pain it causes. And Tanea Winder, author, singer, songwriter, and motivational speaker. She teaches about different expressions of love. She is of Southern Ute, Duckwater Shoshone, and Pyramid Lake Paiute intertribal lineage and African American. She is located on the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho Peoples territories. We acknowledge the 48 contemporary tribal nations historically tied to the state of Colorado tonight. This panel will look at two issues during this critical time in the Black Lives Matter movement. One is the state of Black and Indigenous womanhood as it relates to police violence and racism. And two, how Black women and Indigenous women might cultivate healing and joy in their lives as a means of thriving in the current reality. I'll start with Regina with this question. Why do you think, excuse me, we don't hear much about Black and Indigenous women killed by police?
I think in America, Black and Indigenous people are invisible. No one really sees you. I think in both instances, both Indigenous and Black, women have been disappearing, just disappeared, gone. And there's been no attention paid to this at all, no wide press, nothing. And it is because if you look at critical race theory, you have white men at the top, you have Black and Indigenous women at the bottom, and you have everybody else in between. So in this society, Black and Indigenous women have no value except for the value that we give to each other and ourselves. So what we have to learn how to do is affirm ourselves, value ourselves, protect ourselves and each other.
Thank you. Tanea, your view on the question. Why is it we don't hear a lot about the Black and Indigenous women being killed by police?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what was said. I think it's just because we are seen as disposable, which to me makes me feel that they do not think that we are worthy, that they don't think of us as real human beings, and that we're not going to be missed. And I think there's just a lot of, underlying racism, like it goes back, to slavery and to colonization, where they would come and rape our women, they would steal our women, they would just pass us around so as if we were property, something to be thrown away, something to be disposed of. And I feel like that mentality still continues today. And I think there's like a lot of shame, and it's like this big dirty secret, even on the news, especially here in Colorado, you'll see people missing, but it's always a white person. Like there's never a news story highlighting brown or Indigenous women or children who go missing.
Karen, when you watch media coverage related to this question, what goes through your mind?
Well, I think about my context here in San Francisco. So Black Lives Matter is really born out of the Bay Area, in 2013 with Alicia Garza typing into Facebook Black Lives Matter in the wake of Derek Zimmerman being exonerated for killing Trayvon Martin. Yet here in the Bay Area, we are a capital of trafficking of women. Like if you go to Oakland, there's a whole area where there's lots of young girls from all over the world, but primarily Black and Indigenous young girls who are being sex trafficked out of Oakland. So while at the same time we have a lot of focus around police brutality, and I'll say here in San Francisco, we had a chain of police murders, and coalitions sprung up for all the different young men who were murdered. But when a young Black woman was murdered by SFPD, there was no coalition that grew out of that. That did result in the chief of SFPD being fired. But I agree with what Regina and Tanea said. There's not as much attention given, and that was why Kimberly Crenshaw created Say Her Name, so that we would focus on Black and Indigenous women, and also the missing Indigenous women and girls movement, to focus on how many women are disappearing today in the Native American community.
Ladies, what do you think feeds the perception of this dehumanization of Black and Indigenous women? And anyone can come in.
I think white supremacy feeds it all. White supremacy says that white people are smarter, more genetically superior, and what I tell women, because I don't think they understand this. All of these things, the killing of the earth, the murder of your children in their schools, all of this is happening for profit. For profit. How can we be okay? We may not have to worry about COVID if we kill the earth. It's all based on white supremacy, which ties everything to profit. Everything is for sale. The earth, the people on it, the Indigenous people, the lives of Black people, everything is for profit. And that's the huge problem.
Karen, I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what Regina said. This is 400 years. So in 1619, British slave traders kidnap Africans and bring them to Jamestown to be sold into bondage. And a few months later, they bring a boatload of white women to be the wives of the settler colonialists, because they knew they needed to keep it very clear on site who was in charge. White women have been the tool of white supremacy, maintaining the racial purity and also inflicting tremendous violence interpersonally on Black people, on Indigenous people, and this whole belief system that Black and Indigenous people are subhuman and deserving of harm, so that they can, we can genocide them, we can take their land away, we can reallocate everything they have, exploit their bodies for profit, is the foundational belief system of the United States. And all those beliefs are still present in the media today, in movies, advertising. We are bombarded with these messages every single day, 400 years later. And that's why I'm so proud to see all the young Black and Indigenous people leading the Black Lives Matter protests that we're seeing right now. And it's a generation saying, enough, we're done. Stop with this. Let's redo everything.
Tanaya?
Yeah, I agree that I think a lot of it is because of white supremacy, capitalism, and media sensationalism. I have this memory. So for me, I grew up Indigenous on a reservation in southern Colorado, and I just had this such cognitive dissonance I was talking about earlier. Like, we would go visit my grandpa every month, and he was Black, and it didn't hit me until I literally left my community and went to college, and people were like, well, where are you from? Like, who are your people? And I was like, oh, I'm Black also. And I was taking this class on cultural psychology, and one of my aunts was coming to pick me up. She lived in Richmond, California, and we were driving to Reno, and she was just telling me like all these awful things, like the Black people do this, the Black people do that, and I said, well, where are you learning this information? And she said the news, and I was just telling her what I just learned in class about like the news only choosing to focus on certain things and certain people, and the way that they frame it really affects the way people think. And I could tell like she was getting upset, and then she was just like, well, I guess you're learning something there. And then I had to tell her like I'm Black, and then that finally like made her be quiet. But I always think about that, and I just think about like the things people are just listening to, these echo chambers on social media, or like just watching only Fox News. And even now, with like the Black Lives Matters, with the protests, like I'm sure some people are like they're just only focusing on the looting, or only just thinking of us as menacing, as somebody who's causing harm to them, like just really pitting people against each other, like limiting resources. So many people are in poverty, then people think if we treat these people like humans or give them what they deserve, they're just going to take away from us, when that's really not the truth of it.
So the media.
We have a scarcity model.
Go ahead.
I was going to say we have a scarcity model. We have a scarcity model in the world. There's not enough to go around. So we have people at the top hoarding all the resources, all the money, all the land, and that's white supremacy also,
How important is it for Black communities, Indigenous communities to have their own media to tell the story that's happening now with Black Lives Matters?
It's crucial. We have to tell our own story. If you don't get to tell your own history, then you're in the position that we're in today, which is, I get it. So much of the world's history is lies. It's just lies made up to perpetuate the myth that all of this was done because we were not human beings. We can steal them from their lands because they're less than us. We can take indigenous people's lands and culture and perform genocide on them because they're less than us. So unless you're able to tell your own history, then you're battling against lies.
Mm-hmm. When in the media, when we watch the protests, we're seeing women from different backgrounds coming together in support of Black Lives Matter. And I'll start with Karen here, what are white women missing when it comes to being an ally of Black women or Indigenous women?
I think white women get confused between comfort and safety. So when we get around Black and Indigenous women, we feel very uncomfortable, and that makes us think that we're not safe. But actually, we're very safe when we follow Black and Indigenous women, because they are leading the struggle for their own liberation, and our liberation is bound up in theirs. When they get free and we support them, we will all be free. Instead, we like to stay ensconced in our comfort because we think that we're safe in our comfort, snuggled up with the patriarchy, when in fact, we are actually at tremendous risk. Because guess who is actually killing, raping, harming white women? It's white men. It's always been white men. We are much more likely to be killed by an intimate partner or to be raped by Brett Kavanaugh than we are by some subhuman, predatory man of color. But that narrative has been fed to us throughout history. It's been the subject, Birth of a Nation, that led to the expansion of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s, told that story. And the Ku Klux Klan's policy platform at that point was to take hold of public education. That coincided with the advent of universal public education. And they literally took hold of school boards, textbook decisions, how American history was going to be taught, because they wanted to frame not only white children, but all children to hold these white supremacist beliefs. And that's why it's so important to see what is happening now, as Regina and Tanea said, that for Black and Indigenous people to come forward and tell their own story and to get rid of this old narrative that is totally inaccurate, racist, harmful.
Tanea, what are white women missing?
I think a lot of it like ties back to what was said, but I think in my experience, a lot of it is like the expectation to be taught like by Black and brown women and Indigenous women, and that's extra emotional labor. And sometimes it just happens even in ways I think like don't always realize. For instance, like quick example, I'm going to therapy to try to like help heal myself so I can help healing the world. And then I'm talking to my therapist about like just issues and like having to be a model minority every time I travel, just because I'm like at the airport, people are like, oh, you're in first class, like you have enough points, like stuff like that. And I'm just telling her about my experiences, and she's just like, oh my gosh, like I didn't even like think of those things. Like just like this enormous like guilt and like enormous like feelings of wanting to know and understand and be taught things, where it's like you need to find your own spaces, like you need to do the labor of finding your own spaces to process with people, and like not be making me pay for the session where I'm teaching you about these kinds of issues. I think it's just taking a step back and like trying to be aware of like what's actually happening.
Regina, what are white women missing?
The biggest thing that we see is white women are used to being the center, okay? So to try and have a conversation about race where they are not the center, they always want to center themselves. So we have to put a quick stop to that. The other thing that I think is white silence is violence. And I say to white women, your silence is just the same as you being out there in the KKK robe, burning crosses, beating and lynching Black people. That silence is violence, and that keeps us from being safe. And I think Meghan Markle a couple of weeks ago gave the address to her former high school class, and she said a teacher said to her one time, do not ever let other people's needs be less important than your fears. And that's what white women have got to figure out. They have got to, fear stops us, every one of us, from being the human beings we're meant to be. So they got to stop being afraid of, bugs, shadows, Black men, whatever. They need to get over it, stop it.
The outcomes that we want from these protests. Two major outcomes from each of you.
My major outcome that I want to see happening is that we all heal from the intergenerational trauma that we are all carrying. Regina and Tanea are carrying intergenerational trauma from what my ancestors did to their ancestors. And I'm carrying intergenerational secondary vicarious trauma from what my ancestors did to them. And we need to come to a reckoning as a society and do a reparations and truth and reconciliation process where we face this history together and how it continues to today. And the other major thing the other major outcome I want to see is the end of the carceral state and of the police state, and that we move to a restorative justice practice of solving and mediating conflict in community without imprisoning people.
Thank you. Tanea, what
I
outcome
agree. I think healing is a big part of it. And I also I want to see accountability. I want to see people who've murdered other people like under like the shield or protection or armor of a badge to be held accountable for their actions. And I do think restorative justice is a part of it. I think there needs to be a lot of listening and learning and a lot of unlearning, and people willing to put in the time. So it's not just a Band-Aid to like silence people from protesting, to make us think that like, oh, we won, but I really want to see like some long systemic actual change.
Regina.
I have more than two.
Only
I
two.
think
Not to be
I want,
30 seconds.
okay. I want to get rid of paid prisons, prison for profit. I want to get rid of the profit motive in everything. I want us to go back to what is good and what is the best thing for the people, and not have everything based on profit.
All right. Let us shift now, but not a big shift. Let's a pivot to how do we heal? How do Black and Indigenous women heal in this moment? And in addition to healing, how do we cultivate joy to deal with this current reality?
So I
I'll
think
start with
that
you.
I'm butting in. Girls, love you all, but we have to end soon. I'm working on like the next steps, and I'm so grateful for Heather and Karen and Regina and Tanaya for all of the conversation we're having. But we have to think about like how do we tie it up, and how do you all decide your last words for this forum. We definitely will have forums going forward, right? Like you all know, I'm not done. We ain't done. So just give a couple of minutes to think about like what you would like to go forward, not just because it is fortuitous on what we have to do, but also because I take the work on. I will assimilate the conversations from all of you, and I will do it with the work from WOW Foundation, from our national conversation, from the work that each of you do. So just take a few minutes to think about, like, if you had to ask me, I don't have money, but I will do what I can do. But also, Heather has done such a fantastic job of making this conversation work.
Thank you.
Take your time to think about what you would ask Karen, Regina.
Now, are we talking about on an individual personal level?
You can ask whatever you want to ask. I am literally writing it down, because this is a place where we've never been before. We've never been at a place before where we can say, like, I'm getting directions from a global level, right? They've got MasterCard, they got Moody's, they've got like all these other places. But like right now, I'm just like, how can I assimilate conversations?
One of the things that we always do at Race to Dinner is we always tell white women that as long as they're spending their money with white-owned businesses and white male businesses, they are upholding white supremacy. They need to spend their money at Black, Indigenous, and Brown-owned women businesses.
Got it.
They need to give
We're
to
there.
those nonprofits that are supported or started and run by Black, Indigenous, and Brown women. That's how you
I'll give
make
you the
change. Because
criticism.
everything.
Syra has
Yes,
told me that.
Syra Round.
She's told me that many times over. So I'm
Yep.
definitely on board with that. So Karen, how can we move things forward?
I want white women to want more for ourselves and for our children than what we have now. We live in a society where our kids could be killed in their school, where we could be killed in a church or at a music festival. Why? Because we have upheld violent white men in power for 400 years. If we want to move to safety, We, white women, have to learn about white people's history, learn what it was like. Why did people immigrate over here from England? Why did those white women come over? Because it was terrible for white women in England too. They were running around raping and doing the witch trials and all of that stuff. We came over here, we literally became our husband when we got married, and they have kept us oppressed for 400 years. Why do we identify with them? Stop identifying with the oppressor. Look at the women of color all around us who are leading the fight, the struggle against the patriarchy. Join with them and let's take down the patriarchy together and to create a safe, equitable society for everybody, including us white women. Harmed people harm people, and we have to heal from our harm so we stop harming other people.
What can white women do? Specifically, what can they do?
What can we do? It's about understanding the patterns of behavior that began during the genocide and land theft of Native Americans and slavery that we continue to exhibit today. I keep posting this. White women are the police of the workplace. Hashtag defund the police. Okay? Stop being the gatekeeper. Stop writing those performance reviews where you tell Black women that they were terrible, even though their performance has been fantastic. Stop being jealous of them and unite with them instead. Stop trying to break the glass ceiling for yourself or take advantage of affirmative action and protections from employment discrimination for yourself, and unite with all the people of color in your workplace and fight together to make it equitable for everybody.
Marika, we're down to like 5 minutes and 33 seconds. Do you want me to wrap up, or do you want me to wrap up?
No, thank you for that. Thank you for that, because I was about to bring it back to you. I just want to make sure that we follow up on the last 5 minutes, because, you know, I see the white dude in the corner, and I see you up here, and Heather, and Regina, and all of the people in this panel. But, like, what do we do next? Heather, I am deferring to you, my darling. Tell me what.
So I want to hear from the panel as we wrap up the last 5 minutes. So I just want to know if there's one thing you could say to Black and Indigenous women, what would it be? What do you want Black and Indigenous women to know?
Or do.
I would say that, I would say that it's just self-work to remind yourself that your life matters and that your body is sacred and that your life is sacred, and the world is not always going to reflect that back to you, but we all deserve to be loved. We deserve to be reminded that our bodies and our spirits are precious and that we need to take care of that and find other people who recognize the gift that we are.
Thank you.
3 things that I do that keep me doing. I do affirmations, so I affirm myself every day. I practice gratitude, and I practice abundance. You know, we don't live in a scarcity model. There is abundance. We have to claim our abundance for ourselves.
Devin.
Thank you.
And I would call on white women to put ourselves in harm's way to shield and protect our Black and Indigenous sisters. We have so much privilege, and we can be the barrier. We can amplify their voices. We can ensure that they get adequate resources in their schools, in their communities, and we can work together. We need to spend down our privilege and use our power for good within our society.
Indeed. We've had a wonderful conversation, I believe, this evening. Of course, it's only a conversation, many more to come.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Zuriel Oduwale. I am a 17-year-old filmmaker, a child education advocate, and in my spare time, a presidential advisor and a global peacemaker. I know, I get that a lot. I mean, a teenage girl doing all of these things that adults are usually doing. But here's the thing. Most times, you pick your fights. But there are some times where the fight picks you. Now, our world has changed drastically, and there's no doubt about it. I mean, just 4 months ago, back in February this year, I was traveling across South Africa for my various projects. But now, South Africa has closed its borders to the rest of the world. In fact, most countries have closed their borders. But how did we get here? Over the last 7 years, I have met personally, so sat down one-on-one with 31 world leaders to talk about social development issues. Now, some of those leaders include people like Prime Minister Matteo of Italy, President Marie-Louise Preka of Malta, then there's also President Kenyatta of Kenya, President Buhari of Nigeria, and also President Grabe Kitarovic of Croatia, just to mention a few of them. Now, I can tell you right now that none of those leaders saw any of this coming. And by that, I mean the health crisis with COVID, and also race relations, especially here in the United States. Now, that just tells you that even at their best, none of these world leaders are in full control of what is going on in our world today. Now, on the one hand, that might seem like a scary thought. But on the other hand, it means that each of us has a role to play in shaping our world. Take race relations, for example. When you look at me, what do you see? An American? A teenager? A girl? A world changer? Perhaps you see the youngest person in the world to be featured in Forbes magazine at the age of 10. Or the youngest person to have a scheduled sit-down with the US Secretary of State. Maybe you see a girl who helped to broker peace between two nations on the verge of war at the United Nations at just 13 years old. Do you see a person who self-produced a film and showed it in commercial movie theaters at just 12 years old? What do you really see? Here's the thing though. I'm not an exception. Oh, no. I'm the norm. Just not what you're used to seeing. In life, you can either always hold the positive end of the stick or the negative end of the stick. Now, I believe that tells the difference between a human being and being human. Thank you for listening.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Marika Oglesby here, the executive producer of the WOW One of the World 24-hour global session in the United States. And we are so privileged to be joined today by Dr. Lena Nguyen, who is a professor at George Washington University, as well as an author and contributor to many different publications, including the Washington Post. So tonight, we are talking about the disparities of COVID-19 in relation to women and girls of color, in addition to the public health emergencies, the racial emergencies, and so many other things that are facing our country tonight. And I'm so happy to be joined with Dr. Lena Nguyen. And I want to just open the conversation with a question to you, Dr. Nguyen. You've done so much work and so much good for the people of Baltimore as the health commissioner, and you also continue to do work with your educational purposes. And I just wanted to just give you a moment to talk about what you think are your most important and impactful contributions.
Well, first of all, I am thrilled to be joining you and joining this important conversation that you're having with so many impactful people really around the world. And, you know, this is such a hard time, I think, for all of us. It's a time when we are learning a lot about our shared humanity and about the importance of us being together. I think it's also a time when we are seeing that perfect cannot be the enemy of the good, that there are things that we have to be doing right now and making a difference right now. And when you ask your question about the things that I'm the most proud of, it is those things that, look, the problems that we face may seem really big, but there are actual substantive changes that we can make right now. When I was privileged to serve as the health commissioner for the city of Baltimore, for example, I was very proud of the work that we did around the opioid epidemic. I issued a blanket prescription for the opioid antidote, naloxone, also called Narcan. And I issued that prescription to all 620,000 residents of our city while we were facing this crisis. And everyday residents used naloxone to save nearly 3,000 lives within 3 years. We got a program started that got glasses free of charge to every student who needs them in Baltimore City schools. I mean, I give you these two examples because in some ways they may seem very small. And in some ways they are, because I'm not saying that glasses are a panacea to improving educational outcomes. I'm not saying that naloxone, the antidote alone, is necessary to solve the problem of addiction. But these are tangible solutions that we can implement right now that end up saving lives, that end up giving hope and opportunity. And I think that's, in this time, what we must focus on. Not only the attention to the big structural problems that we face, and absolutely there needs to be attention to these long-term issues, but if there are short-term solutions that make a big difference to people, we need to be doing that right now.
That makes complete sense to me, and I understand. And I'm a Baltimore resident, so I know your work way before many people on this call might understand what you've been doing. So I know that those small incremental changes make a huge difference in the lives of people who may not otherwise have hope their situations will change or improve. But I wanted to just take a quick moment to touch on how this impacts women and girls in Baltimore. So if you have a thought about, we suffer in Baltimore from food deserts. We suffer from, shortages in healthcare. We suffer from shortages in, childcare, mental health, etc. But I just want to take just a quick moment to frame and talk about women and girls in Baltimore, and then from there we'll go forward.
Yeah, and I think it's important for us to frame the conversation around disparities in general. I mean, we look outside our windows here in Baltimore and we see a city of a lot of promise, but also huge disparities, that a child born today can expect to live 20 years more or less, depending on the neighborhood that they just happen to be born into and the color of their skin. And that is the reality, unfortunately, not only in our city, but across the country and around the world. And we have seen these disparities really be amplified and unmasked by COVID-19. COVID-19 disproportionately impacts people of color, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, and we also have seen the specific impact also on women and girls. That women, for example, tend to be the primary caregivers. And working moms, I'm a working mom, we are seeing how difficult it is. I have a toddler and a baby, and I'm very fortunate that I have a job, and my husband has a job, but seeing what it's like to be working parents. And of course, the burden of childcare becomes amplified at a time like what we have now with COVID-19 as well.
Right. So when we think about women and girls who are the frontline workers, like our essential workers who are, they may be challenged with needs to gain personal protective equipment that keeps them safe, and whether or not the institutions that they work for, the companies that they work for, are providing it for them, there isn't really a place for them to go to say, hey, federal government, I need help to get the things that I need to perform the duties that I've been asked to do. So I know that's a big question. You don't have to answer that question right now, but I just want to give you an opportunity to talk to us about, like, what do you think if you could suggest what women and girls of color can do today when they don't feel like they have resources? If there's a way that we can tell them, hey, our country cares about you, or our community cares about you, or our institution cares about how you proceed in this world with this COVID-19 reality. Like, are there any ways that we can increase awareness about what resources they have?
It's a great question. I think part of it is shining a light on the problems that are there. I mean, you talked so well about the problems that we saw with lack of personal protective equipment, even among our healthcare workers. I mean, I cannot believe that during the surge in March, that my friends and colleagues in the United States who are doctors and nurses and EMTs and respiratory therapists they had to post on Facebook to ask for masks. They were buying garbage bags and ponchos because they were scared that they would run out of something like gowns. I mean, that should not be happening. But now we have PPE for healthcare workers, but what about other essential workers too? What if you are a grocery clerk? What if you work for a nursing home? I mean, you also are an essential worker on the front lines. And if you don't have the equipment to protect yourself, then not only could you be endangering yourself, but you're also worried about your family that you'd be coming home to. And that just should not be something that anyone should have to be, that's not a reality that any of us should have to face in any way. And I think that girls and women, we should be empowered to speak up about these problems. We should be empowered to speak as much as we can to our employers, should gather those around us to make these extremely reasonable demands. Because again, we are in the middle of a pandemic. We should have the equipment that's available in order to protect ourselves. And then I've also seen incredible examples of women and girls step up and help one another. I heard an interview with Dr. Alice Stanford, who is a surgeon working in Philadelphia, about how she saw that African Americans in Philadelphia, in her area, were not getting tested, that her patients were not getting tested for COVID. And she ended up figuring out a way to drive around the city herself, along with some of her colleagues, in order to test vulnerable individuals. Yeah. I mean, she's a pediatric surgeon, but to see her and others step up at this time is so inspiring. And I think it reminds us that this is a time that we're all in this together, and that we need to do everything we can to protect one another, because this is about our futures, our collective futures.
I am completely in everything you just said. Like, I've witnessed the testimonials from folks who are on the front lines and otherwise, and all of these needs are so prescient. But there's another underlying kind of question and conversation about how this whole pandemic has unfolded, and the racial demographic and the racial conversation about coronavirus, and the recent rhetoric from our federal government, and how we can make sure that we know, as women and girls and people who support us, understand that this is an issue that deals with race. It is an issue that deals with discrimination. It's an issue that deals with xenophobia. And I've been aware that questions have come up and reactions have come up about how anti-Asian sentiment, how xenophobic sentiment has been framed in the conversation. We had a few days ago where, I'm not going to repeat the slur, it's terrible, terrible, but I just want to not be a person who can not give words as well as someone who is not experiencing that feeling. So I know that during this conversation, like, this is a different context than the general conversation in the nation, but I just want to refer to you and say that I saw your conversation on CNN, and I saw that you gave some super helpful comments and commentary about anti-Asian racism during COVID. And we've experienced it from the beginning with, people coding it as Wuhan, people coding it as China virus and all those things. But in reality, it kind of came to us through Europe, and nobody's talking about that part. We might edit this out. Answer however you will. You can answer that and respond however you would like to.
The World Health Organization has an entire committee that's dedicated to naming new diseases, because there have been instances in the past when diseases are named after people or region that's led to fear, stigma, and racist attacks against a group of people. And this is the reason why we have the name COVID-19 for this disease. And it is extremely unfortunate that President Trump and members of his administration have taken to racializing this disease and to making comments, again, that I wouldn't want to repeat, but that directly fuel the xenophobic and racist sentiments that some people already have against Asian Americans. I haven't wanted to talk about this in the past because, to me, this is, I'm not the victim here. I'm doing my job. I'm here doing public education to treat my patients. But it is true that every time I write a paper, that I am in the news speaking about COVID-19 and how to stay safe, I will get comments that specifically tell me to go back to my country, or that blame me individually for causing this pain and this virus in this country. I have colleagues who are doctors and nurses working on the front lines who have had patients refuse to be treated by them and accuse them of carrying the virus. It's something that, unfortunately, I think all of us have just normalized and internalized and said, well, this is the way that it is, and we need to move on and do our jobs. But at the end of the day, it should not be like this. Just like it should not be like this that we live in a country where African American lives are not valued the same as white lives. We should not be living in a country that still has so many structures of white supremacy and systemic racism. We need to be calling out the problems as we see them, and we need to be working urgently towards the solutions.
Yes, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate just your voice and your sentiments about this conversation, because it's not something that Black and Asian people talk about together often. So I'm grateful for that. I just want to just think really quickly, and I will give you a minute to think about the question. As we move forward, right? Like, as we move forward as a country, we are splintered in many ways. We are so divided in many ways. But I think that most people would agree that there's only one way forward, and that, and this is not a corny statement, that I think that Black Lives Matter. Like, Black Lives Matter, Asian lives matter. I think the reactions to when we say those words, there's a sentiment that means that we are anti-police. And I don't think that's the truth. I think that we are not anti-police. I think that we are definitely for people who help us maintain law and order, but also how police forces have like grown in a way that we haven't expected. That's one point. The second point is about racism as a public health issue and how we can address that in the structures that we have going forward. And there have been a many number of, organizations who have said, defund the police. We've had, restructure community organizations. We've had a number of ways that we've said there's a different way forward. And this is not to, put a stake in the ground for you, but I just want to get your thoughts on how do we, as a community of Black and Brown people, ask for what we want and what we need from the governing organizations that are entrusted with our care, if you understand my question.
Maybe let me answer it this way and start by the point that you made about racism as a public health issue, which is something that I began talking about back in 2015 after the death of Freddie Gray while in police custody here in Baltimore. And I will tell you that it raised a lot of eyebrows at the time. I think people just didn't understand that concept. And so I had to backtrack into it, as in people understood racial disparities. But what's behind the racial disparities? So why is it, for example, that African Americans are suffering disproportionately from COVID-19? Well, part of it has to do with the fact that they're essential workers, maybe living in crowded multi-generational housing where social distancing is a privilege that not everyone has. Part of it is also that African Americans and other minorities have disproportionately worse health outcomes. Well, why do they have worse health outcomes? Why do they have more cardiovascular disease and diabetes and hypertension? It may have to do with the fact that 1 in 3 African Americans here in Baltimore live in a food desert compared to 1 in 12 whites. And if you don't have access to healthy food and vegetables and safe places to exercise, it's no wonder that you end up getting the diseases that are associated with that. And so there should be no question that racial disparities exist and that racial disparities are directly tied to these social determinants of health and economic injustices and structural problems that exist, and environmental injustice that's correlated with that. And so what is at the root of that? Well, the root of that is racism. And so I think it took some time for me to kind of explain the idea of racism being a health issue, racism being a public health issue. I'm really glad now that there's not only recognition of racism as a public health issue, but people are saying that this is in fact a public health emergency. It's been unveiled in part by COVID-19 and the economic emergency that we're seeing for communities of color in addition to the health emergencies. But I think it's long past time that we also begin to specifically address that aspect of racism as a public health issue, of police brutality as a public health issue, and really what our society should be looking like moving forward. That ideally we should be investing in these upstream interventions that we in public health call. We should be investing in housing and education and public health, and reducing lead poisoning is also something that eventually will result in more opportunity and reduces violence. Can we also think about our public safety and public health in this much broader context? And I'm glad that those are the conversations that we're having now.
Yeah, so you covered all of that in like a very succinct comment. So I think that, as we move forward, everyone looks for actionable items. Everyone looks for what I can do, how I can help, what's my next step. And, I think that if we can just take a moment to think about what people can do, and, usually we ask the question, and the answer is usually donate money. If you could tell us what you think anyone who's watching or anyone who we can share this with can do to assist with dismantling racism, with helping our communities, our impoverished and underserved communities, you can share with us what actionable steps you think are next. So, whether it's a community forum, whether it's a donation or what have you, I would love to give a call to action to anyone who watches this interview with you and take your guidance, because you are such an expert in this field.
If I may, I'd like to make it even broader too and talk about COVID in this call to action as well, because this is the biggest public health crisis of our generations. And I would want that call to action to be in there too. So if I may, there are three things that come to mind. The first is we are in the midst of a pandemic that is escalating. So I would urge for everyone to protect yourself, and in so doing, you're also protecting your family members, your loved ones, and everybody around you. And so continue physical distancing, wear a mask that reduces your risk of transmission fivefold. If you can, do things outdoors versus indoors, that further reduces risk by 18 to 19 times. And just keep on protecting yourself and realizing that just because something is open doesn't mean that we need to go. That reopening does not mean that it's now safe. And the reason I talk about this in the context of disparities is if we have another surge in infections, we know that those who are going to be affected the most are Black and brown people, people of color, and minority communities that already bear the brunt of this pandemic. And so the more that we're able to control the infection for everyone, the more we can control it and reduce those disparities as well. The second thing that I would urge for people to do is recognize that we cannot wait. I realize that there are many solutions that are long-term in nature, but if there's something that's tangible for you to do right now, don't wait for perfect to be the enemy of the good. Don't wait until you have the perfect job if there is an opportunity to volunteer in your community right now. If just because you have, we need to be doing all these other things doesn't mean that we can't start somewhere and focus on what we each can do in our communities and even within our families and our friend groups. And then the third thing I would say is to be kind, to practice that type of compassion, recognizing that many of these conversations that we're having now around race and racism are really challenging, that these disparities that we're unveiling have been here for decades, for generations, that it's going to take us time to even begin to recognize them before we dismantle that type of systemic racism that's been here all this time. And so in the meantime, be kind and recognize our shared humanity.
Okay, thank you for that. I literally wrote down my notes and I'm doing the most to make sure that I'm protecting myself and not waiting for what I don't know, and also being kind to those around me. So Dr. Lena Nguyen, it is such an incredible pleasure. I know that we've had a few years of connection, but I'm so grateful for your contribution to the WOW Festival this year. And I hope that we can work together again in the future. I think that I'm just going to acknowledge, like, this is a great conversation. Like, this was like wonderful to be able to connect and have, you know, a presence with about health, about race, about equity, about, you know, all the different things that we have not had a chance to talk about in the past. So I look forward to our future correspondences, and I hope that your babies and your husband and your family are doing well. And anything else you want to add before we sign off?
Only a heartfelt thank you. Thank you for everything that you've done for us in Baltimore, but everything that you're doing leading women and girls and all people around the world. Thank you, Marika.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. With that, we're signing off, and we will add this to the contributions for the Women of the World Festival for WOW 24 Health. Thank you.
Currently, Black women and girls are in a crucial fight to be recognized, visible, heard, and projected. In the midst of COVID-19, Black women and girls have found themselves entangled and consumed with not only fighting for the lives of others in the midst of a global pandemic that has been disproportionately impacting homelessness, unemployment, and mortality rates by the world's most vulnerable populations, but Black women and girls have been left to fight and champion for themselves. From the depths of the criminalization and adultification of Black girls within classrooms, even within the digital space, to maternal mortality, intimate partner violence, and state-sanctioned killing of Black cis and trans women, we are fighting for our lives, and we are fighting by ourselves. For the Black women and girls watching this, I see, hear, and follow you. My ever-being presence has been in lieu of advocating for and protecting the agency and autonomy of Black women and girls. This is inclusive of trans women and girls. As we continue to cultivate space, dismantle institutions, and seek justice by any means necessary. For everyone else, this is a call to action. This is a call to no longer see Black women and girls through the lens of appointed perseverance, background figureheads, and ghostwriters of movements. This is a call to do everything in your power to make sure that you are checking your privilege at the door. Assisting when asked. Opening your purse, both economically and academically, to resources. But you are ultimately and most radically putting your bodies on the line for me and my sisters, because we are tired of dying from neglect, violence, and metaphysical pillaging at the expense and cost of perpetuated oppression. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to our next amazing panel. We have some amazing, amazing women. I'm really excited, and I think you will be too. We're doing Views on the News. We're going to do a roundup of the kinds of things that are happening at the moment. There's so much going on in 2020. I think, I had a conversation with our panelists about some of the interesting things they're going to talk about. I think it's an election year, which we all know is an election year. And so that means we'll be talking about voting and what that means. We'll be talking about social activism and how that's showing up in Gen Z. And we'll be talking about defunding the police, which is a hot topic at the moment, given everything we're seeing and experiencing. So I'm going to introduce my panel. I will say their names and then they will introduce themselves, because I think they will do a far better job than I. So I'll start with Marley.
Hi, my name is Marley Duchovny, and I'm co-founders of Project Divided, which is a youth-led initiative that works to bring people of different political views and backgrounds together for conversations on some of the pressing issues today. So a few months back, my co-founder Casey Moore and I spent 7 months in a small town in Texas filming a web series where we brought different young people, activists, and even healthcare professionals together for conversations on some of the issues that we think we're going to have to solve within the next generation or two. So I'm excited to be here.
And thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Nike.
Hi, everyone. So excited to be here. So in 2015, I did something that was the scariest thing I ever did in my life, the scariest thing, but also to this date, the most rewarding. And I launched an organization called Black Girls Vote. And in 2015, we saw what happened in Baltimore with the civil unrest after the murder of Freddie Gray. When people were looking at it from around the country, I live within walking distance of Mondawmin Mall, where the riots happened. In addition to that, in 2015, I lost my good government job. I was a political appointee, and because of the change in guards, I lost my job. And last thing that happened that really, really propelled me to start Black Girls Vote, there was a murder that happened directly across the street from me. And all three of those things are tied to policy, one way, shape, or another. Whether it's the streetlights on your corner, we're going to talk about defunding the police, the resources that come into your community. And so I said, you know what, in 2008 and 2012, Black women played a pivotal role in the election. They delivered the presidency for Barack Obama. So in 2015, I said, you know what, I want to start an organization called Black Girls Vote that's committed to engaging, educating, empowering young Black women and Black women to get involved in the political process. So here we are almost 5 years later. We launched on the birthday of Shirley Chisholm, first Black woman elected into Congress. And we're about getting out there, engaging, educating our people, Black women, about why it's so important for you to vote and turn your voice. Your vote is your voice. And so we're here, and I'm excited to be here to talk about election 2020 and other things.
I think this is going to be a good one. This is going to be a good one. I can't wait.
All of them are good, right?
Denise.
Yeah, my name is Denise Koch, and I'm old enough to remember Shirley Chisholm. So
okay.
I'll be a different generation on this panel. And I also work in the world of news. So I guess I am the person who sort of personifies that. I am a news anchor and reporter for a CBS station here in Maryland and have been doing it for a number of years. But even for me, more exciting is that I have been part of the WOW USA since it came here, and was really looking forward to this year's WOW. And we had all these fantastic plans, and thought that it would be talking a lot about the fact that this is the 100th anniversary of the year that women got the right to vote in this country. They got it because they fought for it and they won it. It wasn't given to them. They fought for generations, and they battled the same way that we're battling for the things we want to achieve today. They marched and they picketed and they went to jail and they got beat up and all that. So we thought we'd be talking about that, which is something I'm sure that's really close to you two young women, because you care about vote and opinion. But we didn't, because WOW was waylaid by this whole other thing that nobody anticipated called the pandemic and this virus called COVID-19. And then since we have all been quarantined, other really important issues have risen, not the least of which is the fact that we have an election in this country in just a few months. So yeah, this year's WOW I thought would be about one thing, and then the whole world shifted on its axis, and now we're all obsessed with things that are far different than anything having to do with women winning the right to vote. But obviously, it's still a milestone for us women, and as American women, one that we have to celebrate by voting and by taking part in our political process this year, because never has it been more important that every single woman get out and vote. So yeah, I'm in the news business, but I'm most importantly a woman who cares about gender equality and cares about, I have two young daughters, your generation, ladies, and that you have even far more possibility in your lives than even I had in mine. There you go.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you for that. Marley, I'm going to come back to you. There's been a significant rise in social activism in the Gen Z space and that generation. I'd like to kind of talk about that, but also Gen Z voting and engagement, how you get people there. And, I've heard lots of Gen Zers talk about, not necessarily being happy about either candidate and what that means. So I just kind of want to
go for it.
I'll go for it. Yeah, I'm excited about the question. Yeah, definitely. So, Pew Research recently estimated that I think 1 in 10 voters in 2020 is going to be a member of Gen Z. So it's clearly a very important thing to talk about. And in the articles that I read for this panel, I kind of focused on, in the context of all of this social activism that we're seeing, specifically among Black teenage girls and women who are leading Black Lives Matter, and even kind of in the aspect of some of the TikTok organizing that we've seen of teens who were trying to increase turnout at Trump's Tulsa. We really are just seeing lots of women and girls leading the pack and leading the movement. So I think that definitely what you said about kind of this whole topic of, a lot of young people are not happy about either candidate. I think that what we're really seeing, kind of one of the ideas that Gen Z is to lead with is wanting candidates who not only have like words and kind of things that they say, but also concrete actions. So I think that that's a lot of kind of the disillusionment that you're seeing. But also based on a study done by Next Gen America, they found that young people want to see more candidates of color, want to see more women. So they're trying to meet those needs.
Awesome. No, that sums it up. And I think it kind of, Nike, we can come to you now.
Yeah, and I think, and I'll just add, did you say, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go, please.
Okay, good. Because I got a little frozen island. And so I just want to piggyback on, and I don't know if you have a separate question for me, India, but I just want to pick on that we're seeing with Gen Z, that, this is the first time that they can eclipse the baby boomers, right? Previously it was always about the baby boomers. The baby boomers are the vote, and you must get out and talk to the baby boomers. You must secure their vote. But nowadays we see young people, and it's so interesting how they, sometimes millennial and Gen Z, and sometimes it's used synonymously, but they're different generations. And what we're seeing with young people is that they're fired up in a different way. And whichever campaign, you must engage young people in a way that you haven't done before, particularly in a post-COVID, in a COVID world, right? In the middle of a pandemic. And what we're seeing now in the Northeast, things are shifting to the South, and then there are other states that they're going to be impacted by COVID in a different way. So what does that look like? Should we be advocating for vote by mail, right? And then also making sure that we're educating people about the importance of having access to vote, because here in Maryland, there's, we're looking at hybrid voting. Will there be vote by mail, but then also other polling locations? So there are a lot of things that are going to happen between now and November. But more importantly, as we talk about young people, for me, and particularly, I'm passionate about young Black girls, right? And making sure they get out to vote, because, we saw in 2008 and 2012, Black women on the forefront of voting. In 2016, 94% of Black women voted for Secretary Clinton, though she didn't win, that we know this year that Black women and our vote are going to be critical to particularly the Democratic Party. But what does that look like for us? We saw recently that Black women penned a letter to Vice President Biden and say, hey, we want a Black woman candidate on the ticket, right? We want that to be a vice president candidate. Will that galvanize and motivate voters? We'll see. But as a nonpartisan organization such as Black Girls Vote, our job is to make sure we talk about, one, the importance of voting, but also the importance of policy that's going to be delivered to Black people in our community, such as defunding the police. When we look at Black women and maternal health, why is it that Black women are dying at a greater rate than white women? So those are super important issues that we have to talk about. And with Gen Z, they're not going to take this vote from me because I'm a Democrat. That's not going to happen. So you have to find a way to resonate with voters, whether you're Republican or Democrat, particularly Gen Z voters.
That's awesome. And the interesting thing about that is one of you is talking about engagement and the other one's talking about policy, which is the perfect kind of, road to make this happen. But I want to pick up on something you said, Nike, with you, Denise, about defunding the police and just that conversation. What are your thoughts about this from like front to back? What are your thoughts?
First of all, it's a slogan that is misunderstood. Because if you say that phrase, I know, Marley, that you're trying to get people from just different sides to converse. If you say that phrase or paint it on a street to a certain segment of our community, they freak out because they think that means you don't want to have police officers anymore, and they stop listening. They absolutely stop listening after that. Nobody's saying that. Nobody I have heard anywhere in a reasonable conversation, I said we should have no police force. They basically are saying we should redistribute some of the money and rethink what the job of a police officer is. And on that, I will bring up something I wanted to talk about, which is that I've been thinking a lot about police brutality, as we all have in this country for the last couple of weeks. It's the most important conversation people are having. And to me, one of the solutions of police brutality would be to have more women on the police force. Right now, women make up about 12% of most police forces. But it has been proven, it has been statistically researched and proven that women policing make a big difference in the departments. They make a better police department. Women have a different approach to policing. They are less authoritarian. They are less reliant on physical force. They are more effective communicators. This has been studied. Most importantly, they are better at diffusing potentially violent confrontations before these encounters turn deadly. So if we could work for gender equality in police departments, I think that by the very fact that you would have more women there, the kinds of confrontations that end up with unarmed Black men and women murdered, those kinds of confrontations would be handled differently if there were more women officers on the force. Just throwing it out there, anyone who's listening, who's interested in this, there's an organization called the National Center for Women in Policing. They've done reams of research on this, and it's proven over and over and over again that women just are better at defusing situations that men too often go with force and aggression and turn violent. So there you go.
I guess the question I'd have about that, Denise, sorry, Nikki, 1 second. The question I'd have about that, and just would like to explore, is that the issue around policing is also the kind of, for lack of a better word, brotherhood. The fraternal order of police, right? And there are women who play a part in that, and there are women who have also done a number of things that we wouldn't have hoped or expected, right? And because the culture of policing creates something that even it seems women can't escape. So I do get the kind of shifting the balance, but that's, Nike, were you going to say something about that? Did you want to add?
You hit the nail on the head. When I think about that, more women in the police department, that's absolutely great. But I think about, to your point, it's a culture within the police department, and some people look at blue before black, and it makes me think about Carrie Horn, the black woman in Buffalo, who was 19 years on the job, and she stopped her fellow officer from having someone in a chokehold. And she lost her job and her pension. And, just to see this black woman, just to see that, because she was there. And to your point, Denise, having a woman on the force who de-escalated the situation, who said, I pretty much saved this guy's life because a white officer at the time was choking him. She's like, he cannot breathe. And she intervened. And then what happened to her? At the end, she lost her job. She lost her pension, 19 years. And now they've reopened the investigation. But and sometimes that because of that, they blackballed her from the agency. And so now it's like, years, and this happened in 2008, and after trial, and so now 10 years later, 12 years later, she may get justice, but she talked about how her family struggled over these. She has 5 kids, and so she had to look at who's going to support her in this time. So I'm all for having a more diverse police force, but also we have to look at the culture within and how people, women, sometimes can be blackballed, or they are part of, it's blue before black, and we have a loyalty and a code within. But I think this is some of the greater conversations we talk about. Defunding, and to your point, Denise, is a horrible term, and it's kind of redirecting resources and funding to the community, and that's what people want to see, and I think that's what the young generation want to see, because I'm exhausted personally on social media. I see time after time Elijah Muhammad, this young black boy, walking home, and so who said, I don't hurt a fly, and see how he was killed with the police, right? And so there are different things that we have to talk about within, but I want to hand it over to Marley. She may have some thoughts because I can go on and on. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I think definitely like in my realm with Project Divided and social media and Gen Z, I think that it's been really amazing to see how young activists are really leading conversations about police brutality and racial injustice within their own homes, with their families. And I think that there's been a really purposeful and interesting shift where it's really something that we need to be doing. We need to be addressing with our families, doing research. We interviewed a racial justice coach for our Project Divided web series named Janelle Austin. She does amazing work. And one of the things that she really said is like, Google works. As a white person, I can come to the conversation having done my homework and read. And so I think that definitely also within my own life, seeking to have these conversations with family and friends is something that we're seeing a lot of young folks doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think, Denise, but to your point, just kind of going back for a moment, I do think there's something about balance, about gender equity that would help shape that culture, right? Because I think that is the way that there's a point. It takes us some time to get to that. It will take us some time in terms of that kind of switch over, because it's not just the people, it's also the cultural things that you have to break. It's like people leave, but the systems stay the same. And that's why you still get the same behaviors, right? So systemically, there are things that create that.
Well, and speaking of systemically, they did some research also on this, on why men go into the police force and why women go into the police force. More men go into the police force because they want authority, they want control. Which is why they do a lot of recruiting in the military, which is a mistake. Mm-hmm. Women go into policing because they wanted to be public servant.
Yeah.
They want to be a social worker. So if that's the reason people go in, we need more public servants and social workers and fewer people interested in authority and control. And I think if we had, that's what I mean about the balance. If we could shift the balance, I think that maybe we would have more people like absolutely Nike, that officer who saved that man's life because she said, cut it out. And somehow none of those men with George Floyd, not one of those officers had the guts to say that. And she did.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mayor London Breed and San Francisco is doing something where they're sending officers to certain calls without their guns, right? To your point, Denise, they're more so like social workers and to help de-escalate situations. But go ahead, India. I know you have a final question.
I was just going to say we have a couple of minutes left. This is a riveting conversation, and we could go on and on and on. But one of the things I'd like to do just quickly before we sign off is ask you, Marley, and you, Nike, just kind of, when we're thinking about how we get people out to vote, what's the message? What's the message? Marley, I'll go with you first.
Wow, that's like a dollar question.
I know it's loaded,
Yeah,
but we have to ask it.
I think definitely for Gen Z, they found, Pew Research has done studies where Gen Z tends to be as a whole more progressive, but at the same time, less attached to political party labels. So it's kind of, it's a difficult situation where I think that you need to have a message that really sells and that connects to the issues that young people care about. And I think we're seeing that right now with young people really pushing for an emphasis on racial justice, and also some of the things that in our lifetime we are going to have to contend, such as climate change and the massive amount of debt we must have. So I think on that end, addressing the issues that young people actually care about, but also having candidates who in the future are more diverse gender-wise and race-wise, I think is going to be really important.
Okay, thank you, Nike. I know we have to keep it quick. Your views?
Yeah, I'm just going to say, altogether, released a report with Lake Research and Partners talking about women in voting, right? And I think they said 82% of women said they will certainly vote in this election. And then we talk about women, white women is 88% and black women 78%, right? And so when I look at this election, is we always hear every election, this is the most important election of our lifetimes. I absolutely believe it when we think about the Supreme Court. So we have to meet people where they are. Meet people where they are in a creative and innovative way. In Baltimore, we did a Party at the Mailbox campaign where we sent out custom boxes to voters and potential voters about informing them with the education. Everything that's on the ballot, things that are important, how do you vote? And so whoever the candidates are, you have to mobilize them in an innovative way. You have to use technology and make sure that people are going to the polls and they're not going, you can't motivate someone to vote. Why vote for me versus don't vote for that guy because of this, vote for me because of I'm the candidate that you want, right? And that's what we saw happen in 2016. So I say this election is super duper important. I only have like 5 seconds left, but meeting the voters where they are and making sure you resonate with them, particularly young voters, is super duper important.
Thank you. Denise, before we go, you have the last word. Any last words on defunding the police?
Years ago, our grandmothers and great-grandmothers fought to get the vote, make sure every woman vote. That's what I say. Yeah. Every woman in this country must vote this year.
Absolutely. And in closing, I will say thank you to my wonderful panel. Black Girls Vote. Everybody vote. Everybody vote. Thank you to you all for joining us tonight. I want to remind everybody that the WOW Foundation is a charity. It is a small charity. And we are doing this at no charge so that everyone can participate. But there are costs to this. So we ask that you go to the website. Please donate whatever you can, large or small. But by all means, go to the website and sign up for the newsletter. We want to invite you to further events. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful evening.
Bye.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Alex Swan, and I'm a junior international studies major at the illustrious Spelman College who made the choice to change the world through social justice activism. At the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, I could not help but feel helpless, hopeless, and filled with anxiety. More recently, I have been called back to the present because of the beginnings of a worldwide revolution. I have been deeply grieving for those who we have lost to the violence and oppression that is a result of the vicious capitalist system under which we live. And at the beginning of my grieving, I again felt helplessness and hopelessness as I have so many times before. But then I took a deep breath and started looking to my elders for advice. Although this modern day movement looks different from those that have occurred in the past, we all know that history repeats itself, again and again. And our elders have been through it before. They have stories upon stories of losses and triumphs that brought us to where we are today. So here's our call to action. We must use them. We must use our elders who are willing and ready to advise us in this movement for radical change. Conversations are the key to bridging the gap between us. We need to spend more time together, sharing stories and engaging in discourse to think of systematic ways to change the world. And in this journey into the past, to uncover tools that will help us in the present, we must center the voices of the most marginalized. We do not tell our stories of elder women with the same prevalence as we do the stories of elder men. So, we must ensure focusing on bringing voice and visibility to those who have been doing the hard work behind closed doors. Once we know what our elders employed in the past successfully, we can put a modern spin on it and continue using this knowledge to fuel the revolution. Thank you.
Hi, this is India Gary Martin, and we are back with the festival roundup. I have a wonderful panelist. I was going to say a wonderful panel of panelists. That didn't work. So I'll say I have three wonderful guests joining me. I think, hey, I've been at this since 5:30 this morning. Grant me grace. We're still going. We're still going. But no, thank you for joining us. And so I'm going to introduce my panelists before we get started. We're going to talk about some of the amazing things we've seen across the festival, both globally and locally. I'm going to start by introducing my first panelist, Daphne Frias. Daphne, welcome.
Hi everyone, I'm so grateful to be here with you today and to be closing out the USA segment of WOW. I am a 22-year-old activist working in gun violence prevention and climate justice. I am also the United Nations Major Group for Youth and Children Northeast Focal Point, which basically means that I help to advocate for the youth voice within the United Nations and make sure that young people are being counted for in all of our international policy. So as I said before, so grateful to be here with you all and to help guide you through what our amazing programming has been.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're grateful that you're here. Camilla Forbes. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Yes, thank you so much, India. Really pleasure to be here. I am I'm a director and producer and the executive producer of the Apollo Theater, and we also host our partner with WOW and host a WOW Apollo every 2 years. And so we're really thrilled. I'm thrilled to be a part of this conversation.
Yeah, we're just glad I'm glad that you're here, Camilla. I mean, the Apollo has been such a great partner for us for years now, and we're really excited about next year. We're hoping that everything clears up so that we can come together. We need to see each other.
I know, in person.
I know. Rebecca, nice to see you.
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Nagel. I'm a citizen of Cherokee Nation and I'm a journalist and a writer, and I live in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and I used to live in Baltimore, which is how I got connected with WOW. Got to participate with the festival in person a few years ago, and I'm really excited to be part of the virtual festival this year.
No, thank you. Thank you all for joining me. So let's just hop right in. Camilla, I'm looking at you. You're right in the middle of my screen. So I will say, what are the two things that resonated with you? What stood out for you in this festival this year?
Yeah. Do you know what? I will say the opening. I was watching throughout the day, and it was really one of the opening conversations, which were around Black Lives Matter, but also not only thinking about it in a national scope, but also an international scope. This is, and how racism and colonialism has permeated the globe. But at the same token, right, that, of how we're gaining allyship, right, globally, I think is a real strengthening and, quite frankly, kind of sobering issue as well, right? Because I think being here in New York, in the thick of it, in the thick of COVID, and also in the midst of probably one of the most important moments around racial justice in my lifetime, for sure. It has been at times can be very isolating and at times quite exhausting. But that conversation really emboldened me in a way because of the global reach, right? And so that's where I would absolutely start. And it was really exciting. And also the environmentalist conversation as well. I think amidst this moment of, I think, activism and safety around body, physical safety body, being conscious of how and what we're doing in regards to the environment really plays into that. I think it was a real sort of eye opening. It has not been, unfortunately, it's not been a part of my consistent daily activism in a very conscious way, in the way that conversation really kind of floated it to the top. So for me, that was very illuminating.
Perfect. Thank you. Daphne, I'm coming to you. What were your two
Yes.
things? What did you see? What did you like?
One of the programs that stood out to me the most was our spoken word piece that we had earlier today in the segment. And I think what was so special to me about that was it reminded me the amazing power of everyone's individual voice. And how in activism movements, the greatest tool that we can have is sharing our authentic selves. And I say this mostly to my fellow Black and Brown youth organizers. So many people ask me, what does it take to be an activist? What does it take to be a Gen Z activist in particular? And one of the things that I always like to emphasize is the fact that you cannot let anybody commodify your voice or your story, because only you know the truth and existence of what you've experienced. So when working with organizations and working with individuals that believe similar things as you, always stay true to who you've been and where you come from, because if you don't keep yourself wholly accountable to your communities, then the essence of your work is sort of lost. And I think it's incredibly important to remember in this time, as we're going through a revolution, in conjunction with Black Lives Matter, that we are emphasizing and putting to the forefront Black and Brown stories, and making sure that we're listening to them authentically, and that our white allies are not commodifying those stories and are not commodifying those voices, and letting them ring true and speak true in a way that the history of our country has never really allowed before. And then the other panel that stood out to me was the one about gender, race, and equity as relates to COVID-19. I'm coming to you all 2 months after recovering from my own battle with COVID-19. I was sick for a month long. I also am disabled, so I'm part of the high-risk community when you talk about dealing with this virus. And I'm also a public health scholar, so I have many different stakes in this conversation. And I think what's incredibly important about what COVID is bringing to light is the fact that many communities have had to deal with health disparities, and the way that the healthcare system isn't made to necessarily work for minority communities and those of us with disabilities. And I'm hoping that the stories that we are able to bring to the forefront and some of the discussions that were had today on the panel can illuminate some of those hardships that communities like mine have had to deal with. And I think it's definitely been empowering to see that people have been sharing how recovering from COVID has sort of enlightened their view of how the healthcare system is really broken. And we've seen a radical shift from a majority of Americans not necessarily supporting universal healthcare to a large majority of them now supporting universal healthcare, because we've seen how much the healthcare system needs that bolstering and support. So I'm grateful that WOW was able to give space to that really important conversation, and to give light to something that is really personal to me.
I have to say two things. The first one is the voices of youth. I mean, for that's one thing. You came to activism in around 2018 after Parkland, right? I mean, that's kind of what that was one of the things that spawned your activism. And here we are in 2020, and your voice is tremendous. I say to you, Rebecca, good luck for having. We were able to go before her. Good luck. That was a joke. That was a joke. That was a joke. But no, thank you, Daphne. I really appreciate that. Rebecca, coming over to you. The two things that you really you found interesting or that resonated with you over the course of the festival so far.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's so hard to pick. I think right now, the last panel left me thinking a lot about voting. And as one of the panelists pointed out, this year is the 100-year anniversary of women getting suffrage in the United States, but it's so much more complicated than that because we know that Black women didn't get full voting rights until the 1960s and the Civil Rights Movement. Native Americans weren't citizens of the United States technically until 1924, and some women on reservations didn't get full voting rights in the 70s. And then I think even those states, and I think that was something that came up in the panel a lot, I think those states we can even argue are contentious. People who in many states may have a felony record are still barred from voting. We saw last week in Louisville, a city of 600,000 people having one polling place open. And so it definitely made me think about how much more work we have to do, not just about getting the vote out, but actually protecting and strengthening people's right to vote and access there. And then I think the other thing that I'm walking away with is I really enjoyed the Women and Race panel that happened, and I think that there was a question around what can Black and Indigenous women do to take care of themselves. And my friend Tanea Winder, I think, had a really important response, which was about sort of how we value ourselves and guard our self-worth in a world that doesn't value us. And that was something that I think in this moment where, we're seeing, disproportionate deaths from COVID-19 in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, where we're seeing police violence happening over and over again, is sort of, it made me think about what is that practice that we can have to sort of value our own lives when, the system and the state might not place the same value.
Absolutely. I mean, there were so many things that I can think about. I literally watched it from 5:30 this morning until almost now. I think I took like a half an hour break the whole day, and I was going backwards and forwards between the global channel and the local channel. And it was really interesting because one of the interesting things to watch was though the cultures were very different and you could kind of see and feel some of that, the experiences were really similar. And that you can kind of tie the theme through really easily, and everybody's experiencing the same thing, And I think there's a massive risk, and it's already happening to women as a result of the multiple pandemics that we're in. I mean, there are multiple pandemics, so we don't have to talk about what those are. We all kind of know, but there are multiple pandemics, and the risk to women and girls is particularly high. And so, kind of stepping into the next conversation. Why are events like these important? What do we need to do? How do we carry on with these conversations? Because this was an amazing 24-hour event, but what happens next, and how do we carry on these conversations in our respective spaces? So let's kind of talk about why that's important. Camille, I'll come back to you again.
Sure. I mean, it's important. I mean, I personally think it's important. I mean, we are a home to WOW specifically, but I also think, when I think about the institution and when I think about the Apollo, and as I was watching today, safe space kept coming up, right? When I think about what's happening in the world with COVID-19, I step out my door, it is not a safe space, right? Like physically for my body. As a Black woman, I step out my door, it is not a safe space physically for my body. At the Apollo, as a Black arts institution, we focus every day to create safe space for Black bodies, Black voices, Black art, Black excellence, Black culture, to thrive, to feel free, and to feel free to express every 360 degrees of who you are in your being, but also how to elevate and move forward, because it's in these safe spaces that this kind of in-depth dialogue, transformation, catharsis, and elevation really thrives. So I think it's of the utmost importance. And also this intersectionality of ideas and dialogues, so that there is not only a safe space where we're speaking to each other, but we're speaking through each other, we're speaking across each other, is I think also of the utmost importance for true evolution, but more importantly for true revolution.
Absolutely. That was succinct and very well said. Thank you for that, Camilla. Daphne, what are your thoughts?
Yes. Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that WoW creates a space for conversations that might be uncomfortable for people to be had. So I always say that change lies at the edge of uncomfortability. If you're not uncomfortable, you're never going to change. You're never going to shed that layer of skin and sort of metamorphosize and become a better version of yourself. And I think WoW does an amazing job at creating conversations that maybe aren't being able to be had in spaces because they might be unsafe for you, depending on people you cohabitate with, or depending on the cultures that you've been raised in. And WoW creates that space for you to be able to absorb and also share your viewpoints. And I think that that's incredibly important. I also think that WoW does an amazing job at dismantling the negativity that can exist in sisterhood. We live in a culture where women and female identifying individuals are constantly being pit against each other because there's so little spaces for us to succeed. And in a space like WoW, we don't have to be fighting with each other. We can let those guards down and we can feel like we can authentically share our stories without having to sort of make sure that all of our points are in the right place or that society is going to be looking at us in a certain light. So I'm so grateful that y'all were committed to hosting this event, even though we're in strange times, and virtual conversations and physical conversations, when they can happen, are so incredibly important. I would say that WoW needs a continuous support, and I'm so grateful for the spaces and conversations that y'all can help facilitate.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I mean, you summed it up in a number of ways. I think both of you so far, I think one of the biggest words that's come to me through this is safety, right? And that the work that we're having to do requires an immense amount of vulnerability. And in that vulnerability, you need safety. You have to be able to be safe, to be vulnerable, to actually step into the spaces to do the work. And so I always say, well, actually, my mother says, I have to give her credit. You have to do your work before you can do the work. And so making sure that you know your own work and that you know who you are in the space is really important before you can step into the system. Rebecca, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that people have said, I think that WoW provides that space. It's really important, I think, in movement building for us to also re-energize our communities and ourselves and have those spaces where we can have conversations that also help us clarify the issues and focus on what's most important. And so I think that WoW does that at the same time that I think is also pushing people, is pushing white women to think about what their role is in this moment, to pushing us all to think about what are the things in our lives that we need to be reshaping and pushing forward. And so I hope that, the things that people take away from this festival will really help propel people forward, because, we have a lot of work to do. And I think that we're in this moment of where there's a lot of possibility. And it would be, I think, a huge loss if there isn't a lot of structural change that comes out of this possibility. All of a sudden, mayors and city council and all these people who just didn't have the power to remove monuments, all of a sudden are finding out that, yeah, they actually do have the power to take down the Confederate monument. After all of these, conversations of, like that a universal basic income is sort of this pie in the sky idea, and our Congress can't possibly spend all this money. All of a sudden, you know, we whipped up $3 trillion in a few weeks. And so I think that things that didn't feel possible politically a few months ago feel possible now. And I think that it's hopeful. And then I think we've also seen, you know, these moments of conversations about race and Black Lives Matter in our country before, and it not lead to the type of system change that we really need. And so I'm grateful for moments like this, for leaders, for activists, for young people, for veterans, to be able to come together to really kind of clarify our vision around that, because I think that it's really, really crucial at this moment in time.
It absolutely is, and you all captured it beautifully, and I thank you for that. I'm grateful to be in this space with the three of you. The energy that we get from each other, and just being able to have these conversations that we never get to have in this way, is wonderful. And I know that we all have these conversations in different spaces, but being able to do this with 1,000 women over the course of 24 hours and hear the same themes and hear the same energy, passion, power, strength, commitment is just, I mean, it's awe-inspiring in so many ways. And so I just say, Camilla, thank you. Daphne, thank you. Rebecca, thank you for your participation tonight. And thank you for your continued work. I mean, you are all out here doing the work, which is one of the reasons we're here together having this conversation. And so I just wish you all Godspeed in the work, and that we are able to kind of pull this together, and that we can have the sustained energy to do what needs to happen going forward. I'm going to close by saying I have to always give a shout out to my WOW Foundation HQ in London, who tirelessly put this together. The WOW Foundation is a charity. These events are free because we like to ensure that every single person who has a digital device can join us. So please go to the website, donate if you can, but by all means, go to the website and sign up for our newsletter so you can join us for the next WOW Global 24. I'm already pushing, they're telling me to stop, but we have to do it again soon. I'm just sure of it. So thank you all. Good night, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for joining us, everyone, for the U.S. leg of the WOW 24 Global Festival online this year. I hope you've learned a lot. I hope that you've gotten a lot out of our session today, and that you're taking some really good lessons and some great material forward with you. I just want to take a quick moment to say some thank yous that are very important for us to recognize during this huge event, which is a huge undertaking. The WOW Foundation has done a tremendous job of putting together an incredibly complex set of variables and various pieces and parts and people. And, you know, I'm really, really delighted to have been part of it and to work with the team in London. So thank you to the WOW Foundation. I'd also like to thank our local US chairs, India Gary Martin and Pat Mitchell, who are the co-chairs of the WOW USA part of the foundation. Of course, we have to also thank our global founder, MasterCard, for their support of the event today. And then I just want to do a really quick shout out to some of my fantastic speakers who, you know, are always there when we need them, and they come together and provide this incredible content. Just a quick thanks to Vanessa Geffrard of Vagesteem Podcast. A quick thank you to Dr. Lena Wen. A quick thank you to Ellen Cherry, and to all of our youth contributors today, because I know that the youth are our future, and they are the ones who are going to lead us forward. And we're so happy and so excited that they were able to be with us as part of the event today.